Welcome to J is for Justice podcast. If live breaking news and following true crime is your thing, then please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you like what you see in my videos, please consider giving them a thumbs up. Happy Saturday. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome back to J is for Justice. Thank you. Thank you, Just Diana, for joining this evening. Thank you. Hey, Whistle Down. Hey, Marcy. Hey, White Lotus. Hey, Shell. Hey, Beans. Linda Farley, thank you for the jewels. What's up, Mama Bear? Hey, Armenian girl. Hello, lovely. Thanks for joining tonight. You guys hit the like button. We got lots to talk about. I held off on watching any of this stuff to watch it with you all. So we're going to be talking about Cy Ray and all of this new stuff. We got Brian Ensign's interview, but I want to go back in time a little bit. Hey, Kraka. Hey, Angel. Good to see all of you tonight. I want to go back in time because I'm a little confused on Cy Ray's position here. I'm a little confused. Hey, Michelle, come on in. Hey, Danish. Hey, Jay Mortiz. I saw you earlier. Ostrich, good to see ya. AJ. Nicole B. Truth Scooters, I like it. I like it, Bashia. Hey, Ark. Trasha Junkins. Hi, Jay. I'm livid right now. There's currently a live going on, and they are bashing Kaylee's family so bad. Ew, who's doing that? Good evening, Proud Mimi. What's up, Toyo Toys? Family soup. My chat is possessed. Hi, Tracy. Oh my gosh, it's Brown Eye. Hi. And Autumn Fragrance. Autumn Fragrance, where have you been? Good evening. Who is doing that? There are some really shitty people. Hey, Why Wonder. Yeah, don't listen to those people. Anyways, tonight, we are going to be digging into this new information on the data in Bryan Kohberger. Hey, Molly. Hey, Jen. Hey, KM. Aya, come on in, guys. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Dago, Jules, Bronx in the last 24. I don't watch any of those people. And that's probably why. There's no reason for that. Report it. Report it for misinformation. I don't know. Don't watch those people. Hit the 3 little dots and say, don't recommend this channel. There's always going to be people like that. There's nothing we can do to stop them. But giving them attention is not the way to go. Marcy Brem, how are you this Saturday evening? Carrie Lou. Hey, Karchi. Thanks for coming in tonight. Tiffany B, blessings back to you. Hey, Wee. Vogue says F the Pro Burgers. I'm too pissed at Lauren to focus. Oh, yeah. X has been wild today. Lauren Matthias has taken to X, and it's not working out well for her. It's not working out well for her at all. It's okay. I mean, I understand you're upset and floored, but these people have been doing this since the beginning of time. Vogue says, I'll be setting them straight. Beware Pro Burgers. I wish I still had all my Nancy Grace Kohberger sound bites, but I don't. Hey, Body. Oh, Body, I can't wait to see what you think about this stuff. Hey, Deanne. Yeah, X has been wild. Lauren Matthias is wild. She underestimates the power of X. People tell you who you are on X, and they don't hold back, and she's gotten a lot of shit, which she deserves. She doxed out a viewer. This is what Lauren Matthias did. Let me just tell you really quick. She doxed out a viewer for a DUI from 2015 because this person doesn't like her. She doxed her out, shared the mugshot. This girl has totally, like, got the charges dismissed and everything. And Lauren has the nerve to bring up people's wrongdoings. It's insane to me. Very interesting, but I don't know how much I trust Cyree. Okay, so that's what I'm going to get into. Let's just dive right in. If we go back to May 31st of 2024, we have Cyree saying that he has exculpatory evidence that would clear Bryan Kohberger. Remember the whole he was stargazing at Wah State Park? What I'm confused about with Cyree is why he backed that up. Why did he say that he agreed with that and that he had exculpatory evidence and from everything he had seen, everything was working in the defense's favor? So Cyree, this is from, again, 2024. Cyree, whom Kohberger's defense team plans to call as an expert witness, said his review of the evidence provided by the FBI and the police so far shows not all of the cell phone data extracted from Kohberger's phone around the time of the murders in 2022 was mapped. He further testified, and you remember he was in this hearing here, in this one. Brent Payne in a pretrial hearing, Brent Payne and Cyree testified. Thank you, Colette, for your super chat. But let this load. Remember this hearing? I'm not going to bore you with it all, but let it load for a second. Thank you, Colette.
Significant locations in this case.
This is him.
We're missing some data.
So this was Cyree, and I don't know if you guys remember watching this hearing, but we were like, what is happening? But anyways, let's go back to this. He further testified it's crucial to receive all of the AT&T source data and related information for him to verify. It's a terrible practice to justify probable cause with these very detailed call records that give breadcrumb-like trails for individuals and then not map it. Because of the piecemealing of the data, because of the missing data, because of the data I'm reviewing that is incredibly inaccurate, everything that is missing is absolutely in benefit of the defense right now, Ray testified, adding, quote, there are other reports that are missing that I can't tell you are benefiting Mr. Kohberger or the state. He added it's unclear why certain data is unavailable. Is this human error? Is it accidental? Is it intentional? What he has seen so far, he says, appears to be, quote unquote, exculpatory to Kohberger. I see. I haven't watched it yet. We're going to. Ray, a former police detective in Arizona, testified that he typically has been an expert witness for prosecutors. His expertise has previously come under scrutiny. I did a 3-hour stream on that. Who is Cyree? Yeah. And then it says, that's about Brett Payne. And then we have this here. This filing from 3/24/2025. Oh, shit. Where is it? I don't know why I pulled this up. Something in this mentioned Cyree. Anyways, what I'm confused about is why he was saying there was exculpatory evidence for Bryan in this hearing, and then now we have this. And I haven't watched this yet, so we're going to watch it together. I don't know what he said. I've heard things. I've seen clips of things, but I've heard that he puts him right directly in the house, like Body said. Hey, Jax. Hey, Leo. Hey, Colette. Hey, Jay, I'm watching your live on Seth's lawsuit. Currently on the live where Chris blew up on Trisha in the panel. Oh, God. Good to see all of you guys. All right, so here we go. There's another one, too. Did you guys see this one with these lawyers in Cyree? Because there is a second interview that he did in the last couple days. Or 2 weeks ago, sorry. This one was 2 weeks ago. And you got to wonder, why is he talking now? And apparently he's saying that Ann Taylor had an inappropriate relationship with Bryan Kohberger. Hey, Glass. All right, let's watch Enton's first. Here we go.
Thank you for being here as always. And I know Olivia is going to join us in a little bit. She's dealing with the baby. But I wanted to continue this conversation from the time you just had on News Nation. And I know, Steve, that you and Olivia wanted an opportunity to be able to talk to Cy about some of the information that he has since he was a defense witness for Bryan Kohberger. I just wanted to ask one question before I throw it over to Steve, though, and it kind of plays off some of what you said on News Nation, Cy. You talked about
Was there anything on News Nation that we should watch, or is this where all the bombshells are?
Bryan Kohberger potentially being at the house before. Can you elaborate on that a little more? I mean, are you able to, and I know it's not exact, but are you able to say whether he was actually inside the house?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be a little bit more responsive on these questions and drag it out a little bit. So if I'm going on and on, stop me.
Yeah, and
But
you can do that on this. We have unlimited time, so feel free to
Thankfully.
explain. Yeah.
yeah, and 100%, like I'll make myself available to the family, by the way, 24/7. Like if you guys have follow-up questions going forward, by all means. When I heard that you guys wanted to have this conversation, I actually
Wow.
it
He's making himself available to the Gonsalves family?
meant a lot to me, and I was like, oh, finally, I can talk to the victim's family because I've spent my entire career advocating for victims' families. I've done a lot of stuff with parents of murdered children, and this is a very hard place that it started out trying to be at, and I really appreciate you guys reaching out. And anytime you have questions, I'll give you my direct number. By all means, feel free. You guys can hit me up anytime.
Thank you.
But what I want to cover on that piece is, when we start looking at the house itself, there's a couple different things we can look at. AT&T has a very specific report, and it's called Locdebor. And I know it sounds like a silly word. It's LOCDBOR, Locdebor, and it's location database of record. This will include estimated latitude and longitudes, and they range from 25 meters out to 3,000, 30,000 meters, so they can get very big. Historically, there's accuracy issues with this report. So if you just take all the data and you throw it on the map and you think that's accurate, you're going to have a lot of problems. A really good example in this case is there's a time when Bryan goes up to Seattle and one of his Locdebor hits shows him in New Orleans. So that gives you an idea of the accuracy issues. There's two factors, and like I said, I'm going to pile on a lot of data for you guys. The next thing that comes into play is the actual handset, the phone itself. iPhone actually restricts a lot of third-party apps and even the mobile carrier to some points of getting precise location data, which a lot of people don't realize. If I try to ping a phone, that phone ping can actually be screwed up by Apple itself to instead of getting this nice, neat little GPS.
Okay, so he's saying the original, now help me out with this. He's saying the original data was inaccurate where it showed Bryan, even though he was in Seattle, it showed him in New Orleans. Is that what I'm catching from this?
Yes, I get this 5,000 meter GPS range, and he can be anywhere in that 5,000 meters. Samsung, on the other hand, is a very chatty phone. It's preloaded with all kinds of silly apps and ridiculous monitoring. If anybody's ever had a Samsung, when you first power that thing up, like there's 100 apps on that thing. It's good for law enforcement because when we get a phone that's a Samsung phone, it's typically very chatty on the network. We're going to see a lot more connectivity. Samsung's also unique that if I do certain things with certain apps that require location data, such as GPS or navigation, that accuracy from the 3,000 or the 5,000 meter ranges come down to 25 meters. And in this particular case, if you look at those precise measurements, there's probably 5 that land directly on what would be the living room of the house. Like the latitude, longitude is the physical house itself. And, if you put the house back on the map and you map those, the hits are inside the house. Now,
I'm going to let you keep explaining. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So, because I haven't heard this before. So you're saying based on the data you saw, the latitude, longitude for Bryan Kohberger's Samsung was in the living room?
the AT&T derived latitude longitude from the AT&T's network that it estimates a location it lands in the house. And it's a 25-meter range. So, we're talking 75 feet. So it could be anywhere in the house on any floor. It could technically be outside the house. It could be on the property. But it's showing in the immediate area. My
Does he give a date on this?
personal opinion is when I look at those and I map what's happening before and after, and I'm looking at all the other evidence, I think these are accurate locations. And to Steve's point earlier, this is why court, I think, is so critical for this case. That's an argument to be had in front of the jury where the defense would come in and say, hey, you can't reliably say this. And the prosecution would say, here's why. When done right, I feel that they're reliable.
But wouldn't this guy, okay, so if Bryan Kohberger gets a trial, he wouldn't necessarily be a defense expert anymore because it would be a different, team of lawyers, right? So basically, he's off the hook. Once Bryan Kohberger took the plea, is he off the hook? He can just talk? No exact dates? Okay. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
So when you say accurate locations, you mean you believe based on your expertise that he was inside the house on previous occasions?
So I'll qualify a handful of things tonight. And again, Steve, any questions that later on, by all means, hit me up. I'm more than happy to pour over anything you want to. One of the things the defense did with me early on in this case.
Yeah, she was calling Cy Ray because right here we just read an article from 2024 where Cy Ray, whom's Kohberger's defense team plans to call as an expert, said his review was exculpatory. And then he testified for the defense in the pretrial hearing as well. So I don't understand what he's doing. He said, like I said before, he said he had exculpatory evidence that would clear Bryan Kohberger that he was stargazing at why. So what happened to that? I don't understand the change he's had in this is what confuses me.
Geolocation data, and they said, hey, as a former homicide cop, as a homicide sergeant, as a supervisor that supervises these type of investigations, we're interested in anything you can find. And they poured tons of data over. Why that's important too is it's not just the phone stuff. There's a lot of stuff inside the crime scene and things that I reviewed in the crime scene. I 100% believe that the offender, who is Bryan Kohberger, there is no alternative theory in my head at this point. He's been in the house before. I think there's.
See, I would like to know where this change in opinion came, because he was all for Bryan Kohberger being at why. Remember that was his alibi. So when did does anybody ask him? Hey, when did your opinion change? From Bryan being at Wah State Park stargazing to being inside the house. I mean, does he show any data proof of this? Does he show any proof of this? Any of the mapping? I don't understand. It's just confusing to me. Oops, sorry.
Absolutely no doubt he was familiar with the basic layout of the house. I'm not saying he was intimately familiar with the entire house, but he had a working knowledge of the house. That house is laid out very weird. I've been through the house. The path that was taken, what we see is what occurred in that house, him coming and going from the neighborhood. There's prior knowledge. There's no doubt in my mind that there's prior knowledge. So that also helps support some of this. One thing I want to kind of circle back to, Bryan, and Steve, you'll find this in my report. And it took me weeks to get the defense to allow me to put this in my report. They didn't want me to put it in there. There are third-party databases that collect.
They didn't want me to put it in there.
MAID ID, so mobile advertiser ID. And you guys have all experienced this where you've searched for, I don't know, a pair of shoes. You've Googled a new pair of shoes you think you wanted. And then 2 days later, you're surfing the internet and some ads are popping up for those shoes. That's based on your mobile advertiser ID. It's a unique number, but there's third-party databases that collect that. And typically when they're collecting that type of information, it gets a latitude, longitude stamp with a timestamp. So we can actually see. Law enforcement can access those databases. You have to have a search warrant. There's a process to go through. in my report, what you'll find is it's towards the very end of it. I actually lay out that, hey, there's more than reasonable suspicion here to believe that this phone has been inside the residence or very close to the residence on these dates. Typical criminal investigation, we would go look at these third-party databases, pull all the mobile advertiser ID data from those dates. Forget the 13th. His phone is off. We're never going to get his phone in or near the house on the 13th, and that's where all the focus was. But if we go back to pattern of life and we pull these other dates leading up to the crime, I feel incredibly confident that they're going to get precise GPS. Now I'm talking 3 meters. So now we're talking less than 10 feet at, around, and very close to the house on these different occasions.
Okay, so he's saying as time went on, they were able to get more and more precise. And he's saying now within 3 meters. What's up, YouTube bad actors? Ray was going to say the investigation was done poorly, but because they could have done it so much better, he discovered in the evidence that actually buries Kohberger. Is that why Ann Taylor was like, I don't need you? Like, did she know that he found this? I need to know more deets.
The idea that I put this in my report and said, this is the kind of follow-up I would expect to have, and nobody ever, I fully expected as soon as I dropped that report that January, that by February, March, we were going to see discovery on this new data. They didn't even look at it. They didn't even bother with it. It's incredible.
If they looked at it, they wouldn't have understood it. We heard that in court when they were talking about a JSON file and how you can edit it and how like that was some kind of weird anomaly. It's like, that's what the file's for. That's what you use it for. I mean, it was very confusing to the audience, but the lack of knowledge inside that courtroom at certain times was very frustrating to me. And, I mean, I wouldn't hire my own people. I would Shadow Dragon. I've said it multiple times. They have OS lint. They were like, Steve, the same emails they're using in this court case are the same emails we're tracking back to your children. But we're not doing it for free. They weren't like a Cyray. They're like, I think there was a 30K. Don't quote me on that, but I that's what my mind wants to tell me. It was like a 30K. And they said, we're not giving it up on a case this big. We keep doing, because we're highly in demand. We're not going to take a case this big and not get stiffed with the payment. We're not making that our message. But they literally said, we can literally tell you that he's been connected to these people through his fingerprint of his emails and the things that he was doing online. It's a whole science that they have out there, and touch points, and they put it all together. He was very confident, and he said they're refusing to give me any money. They want to do it for free. And to that point, the Cellbrite, the Barnharts ended up didn't have to do it, but they did it for free, just like Cyray. So there was these decisions being made, not over.
Wow, that couple did the Celebrate for free? This is Cyray right here. He's a computer analyst. I don't know, cell analyst, whatever. He used to be a cop, detective. And then he got into like cell phone data expertism, whatever.
The right decision. It was, I don't know what it was, but evidence was being missed in a case that the world was watching, and we can do better. We can learn from our mistakes, and we can do better, and that's why we're here right now.
And Steve, if you think about it, let's push that price up to 50K. When you look at the amount of money that was spent on this investigation and bang for the buck, spend the 50K. It's probably the best that you're going to spend on this case, because it's going to show that I think those concrete connections. I do have a question. I think you guys might be interested in this. I believe that the girls went to the A&W. There's a little A&W and a little store.
I know exactly. Yeah, right down the street.
I think this was a pretty routine thing that they hit on a regular basis. And I'm really curious to some of the background there. But one thing that I've always said is missing, and it's really bothered me. Has anybody ever approached you guys on what's called VICAP? Have you ever heard that word VICAP? Or it's basically a history of the victims to everything of where they shop. If they order pizza, where they order pizza.
Dang it, Nancy. The fact they found hair in Ethan's hand, it was stuck to the blood on his hand, Nancy. That Gonsalves explained that. There was a lot of girls in that house, and girls shed a lot of hair. And there's reasons for that hair being just stuck to the blood. It's not a conspiracy, in my opinion.
Has anybody ever approached you in this investigation to try to
Closest
recreate?
we got to they were scared once I hired a lawyer. They just stopped talking to me, and my lawyer said they'll answer questions, but to the point of they're not going to be witnesses because they didn't want the gag order to fall over. I told my lawyer I want the ability to speak on behalf of my child. If anything comes to the point where they're going to put a gag on me, then they can't talk to me. And I had nothing to hide. It was just you're not going to control me like an asset. I'm going to speak on my daughter's behalf, or I'm going to jail, one or the other. So, yeah, we never got there. We got to the passwords. We got to usernames. They hit Olivia up. Olivia got into the cloud ID. Like Olivia hacked. It's fake. Like we know the passwords.
I knew my sister's password on her Apple device, but it was two-factor authentication. So it would send a code to her device, and they wouldn't. And still to this day, they've not handed over her phone because they say that they can't get into it. But regarding VICAP, and I apologize if I got that wrong, no, we've never ever heard that. We've never been familiar with that at all.
You would remember it's about almost 300 questions, and it's a deep dive in any information. And this has nothing to do with the gag order. There's no reason they wouldn't do that. The reason I'm asking is there's certain things that would come out in their normal pattern. Like, hey, if they ran to the convenience store, what convenience store would they run to?
So I think what I'm gathering, guys, is that he was, yes, working for the defense. I mean, according to this article, it says they planned to call him as an expert when they went to trial. I mean, obviously it didn't go to trial, so that didn't happen. But he reviewed the evidence provided by the FBI and the police. And then I'm gathering that he's saying that the more he dug into it, the more precise data he got. I don't know. I don't even understand pattern of life. I don't even know what that means. Is that like looking at every day like what was normal? I guess. The cell phone data stuff confuses the shit out of me, so bear with me.
Is it kind of they met friends or everybody was going, was there a place that they would converge? And we're getting back into the reliability of the GPS. So I don't want to get too far on a branch saying I know this happened, but there are multiple times that the device, Kohberger's device, is in the area of the house, and then it moves to the parking lot of that A&W root beer. At the same time, multiple residents of the house go to the A&W root beer. So there's times where I can actually see and that to me, that's what we call a collision. It's one thing to have devices in a general area, but when we see the two devices tracked together to a...
Okay, this is weird. So did he follow them then? Because he's saying that two of the devices... Let me go back in the transcript. We're getting back to the reliability of the GPS, so I don't want to get too far on a branch of saying I know this happened. But he says there are multiple times that the device, Kohberger's device, is in the area of the house, and then it moves to the parking lot of that root beer place. At the same time, multiple residents of the house go to the A&W root beer. So he's sitting in the parking lot? Was he listening to them? Did he know where they were going? That's weird.
And we're getting back into the reliability of the GPS. So I don't want to get too far on a branch saying I know this happened, but there are multiple times that the device, Kohberger's device, is in the area of the house, and then it moves to the parking lot of that A&W.
It moves to the parking lot of the A&W root beer.
At the same time, multiple residents of the house go to the A&W root beer.
Wow. So was he heading there first, or was he behind them? Clearly, he was... I mean, following them would mean they went to the root beer, then he went to the root beer. Why would he go to the root beer first unless he knew ahead of time that's where they were heading? Was he listening to them? Had he been in that house, and did he bug their house or something?
House, and then it moves to the parking lot of that A&W root beer. At the same time, multiple residents of the house go to the A&W root beer. So there's times where I can actually see and that to me, that's what we call a collision. It's one thing to have two devices in a general area, but when we see the two devices track together to a point and then track back, that's incredibly telling. So, the idea that nobody has come back to you guys and said, hey, let's talk about the A&W or some of the other friends it's just mind-blowing to me. So I can't agree.
So do we have a lot of things in the documents? I'm going to admit I haven't gone through all the documents, but do we have anything specifically about the A&W that stands out that we've heard? I mean, maybe he's saying he was in the house. There was talk of something connecting to a Bluetooth device, or Steve Gonsalves had said that his phone touched their Wi-Fi or something like that. There was something with Kaylee's Bluetooth speaker. I don't know.
Agree with you enough. It needs to be changed. That's why I took this case. I'm hoping in any pain and trauma that I've caused you guys, I can't apologize. And I give my sincerest respect and condolences on this thing. I couldn't imagine being in your guys' situation, having to go through this. And now it coming full circle back. But at the same time, when I first looked at this case, my initial thought was this can never be the standard investigation that we see on cases like this. This can never be acceptable. Brian and I were talking before you guys jumped on. After the plea deal, I actually, and against the defense, Ann was incredibly upset with me for doing this.
Oh.
But I've created a 1 day debrief that I've been going around the country for free, providing to law enforcement. And for you guys, hopefully this helps a little bit. We've had an incredible response from law enforcement. The service you guys got on this case, the average law enforcement agency is appalled by. Since November, when I started teaching this course, we've had 300 agencies throughout the United States attended. So it's resonating. We're getting a lot of endorsement of, yes, we need to change these things. But it's really interesting to look at that, just how much fell through the cracks on this case.
So I have a quick question, and I hope that it comes across the right way. So my question is separating the murders and the burglary from the stalking. And as we know, the state never picked up stalking charges.
Hey, potato.
But the FBI currently still has an active investigation.
Mm.
Do you think that some of those things were not picked up by the state because of this separation? Or do you think that this would have been something that would not have driven a charge, or would not have been evidence of a charge that they were not actively pursuing?
I am guessing. This is my opinion of it, things that I've seen. I'm happy sharing this opinion to whoever, but there's a lot that needs to be filled in for it to land where I say 100% this is what's happening. I'm about 90% here. They back themselves into a corner, into a no-win situation, because the problem the FBI has with stalking right now is they cannot prove stalking in the work product that they did. It'll never hold up in court. In fact, I don't think a federal prosecutor would even take the case. So that's why we haven't seen the FBI proceed with that. Does the FBI have information right now, or potentially the ability to go get information to prove that case? 100%. But their problem that they have.
Tell me what that would be.
Well, it'd be that mobile advertiser ID. It would be mapping all of the AT&T records and looking at the pattern of life of Bryan over 6 months, where we see these routine travel patterns. We can see where he's going, what he's doing, how long he's stagnating there. Understanding pattern of life is everything for this case. The problem the FBI has is to make that stalking case, they're going to have to disclose or discover new evidence that never came out from the state of Idaho. And now you have these competing cases where you have a case that allegedly went through the entire process of discovery and never produced the evidence that's needed. And now for a federal case to all of a sudden say, oh, by the way, here's this other evidence.
Okay, so what I'm really worried about is that this is going to, okay, so with Bryan Kohberger asking for a trial, is this going to give the Gonsalveses false hope? Let me listen to this part again.
Disclose or discover new evidence that never came out from the state of Idaho. And now you have these competing cases where you have a case that allegedly went through the entire process of discovery and never produced the evidence that's needed. And now for a federal case to all of a sudden say, oh, by the way, here's this other evidence. They've painted themselves into a corner that they can't explain.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they can kind of explain it because they weren't going for stalking, right? It didn't fit the narrative of Bill Thompson. Bill Thompson wasn't going with a stalking that Bryan Kohberger stalked. As a matter of fact, he said no. There's no evidence of stalking. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, no, I get it.
I feel like there's two discoveries because I've actually heard almost everything that you've said already. That he was in that house, even waited in certain locations for like extended periods of time of no movement. This wasn't the only house that he stalked. There was like a loop that he was following, and there was a couple other places that he basically stood still for a certain amount of time. Just telltale.
There was a loop that he would follow.
Signs that this person wasn't shopping, you know, and they cross-correlated to bank records and the ATMs and all that stuff. They had some stuff, the basic old school investigations they had down, but the technical was almost like they outsourced it to the FBI. And then when the FBI were like, we're not so sure that our discovery is your discovery or our investigation is your investigation, that there was these huge gaps in it. And when they went to go to...
Okay, but when the victim is dead, how do we know what the victim was aware of? We heard stories after they were killed that Kaylee thought there was a man staring at her. That there were these weird things that happened. So if they're dead, how do you know if they're aware of it or not? That is so stupid. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Idaho.
Make a case, it wasn't so clear. So as a father, I'm like, I'll fill in the gaps if I can, especially when it comes to technology. And it was an eye-opener. It was so frustrating to sit there with a guy who looks like Santa Claus who has his consciousness, his short-term memory on a piece of paper, and has no clue about technology, never will. And there's 4 lives in the bounce.
100%.
It's just scary.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, you know, this is a big problem with the FBI. The FBI has a habit of coming in on these cases. And where the problem happens is the FBI has access to things they can't get into court properly. They can't lay the foundation the way that state courts require. But they still proceed. The IGG, I will tell you, the investigative genetic.
Okay, before we get to the IGG, first off, AJ Life Jacket, remember the neighbor who had someone go through her luggage? Was she in that loop? Good question. That's a really good question. And Shell coming in super duper hot, 74 months as a member on J is for Justice. Thank you so much, Shell. Oh my goodness. That's huge. 74 months. Wow.
Genetic genealogy on this case is overlooked at how impactful it was. As soon as they made the decision to go with investigative genetic genealogy, this case was doomed from an ethical perspective because they had to go outside of policy. They had to hide things. And now once they got the hit, you can see it clear as day. The rest of the investigation is how do we hide the IGG? Because we don't ever want to talk about the way that for me as an old school investigator that drives me crazy is Bryan Kohberger's vehicle and his name are setting in a report that entire time. All they had to do is follow up and get a sample of his DNA. If they would have done that and stopped trying to rely or over rely on this technology of the IgG produced, I think this is a completely different case. But they crossed a line with IgG. They knew they crossed the line, and everything we see after that is nothing more than smokescreen.
Is he saying they crossed the line with the IgG because they went into systems they weren't supposed to? That they went into databases they weren't supposed to? Hashtag FBI.
Trying to hide what actually happened to identify him.
I'll go a step further and be careful with this. I wish my lawyer was here. The IgG was done in a scripted fashion of it works. We know how it does. They told me the people that I've been around said, if we get it tossed out, it led to the dad. It never led to BK. And that's by design. It never goes to him. It goes to his father in the trash, established the law, and then we got a warrant and we got the cheek swab. We got it down. IGG is not going to ever be in court because it's a tip, and this is established standard, and we're not going to let a little podunk Moscow make court law or state law or any kind of law. This is never going to get into a courtroom because we have these established practices, and that is what it is. And, you know, if you call a tip on a black SUV that you've seen that has some kind of explosives in it and something, and you want to give that tip, well, that doesn't go into court either. So I get where they're going with it, and the greater good. I'm just a dad trying to make sure that my daughter in the system gets better, but
Yeah, it stopped at like cousins or something who said, nope, we're not giving you. Oh my God, no, I did not see the Q-tips they pulled of dads. No, Leo. They showed those? Gross. I've missed a lot. Whoops. Brian. LG.
do see some red flags, and I know we had the right guy, and we just made it all difficult for everyone. We just made it so difficult for everyone because nobody knew what they were doing.
Yeah, and go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think it's difficult for people to grasp that we can stand behind his guilt, but not understand or agree with everything that the prosecution and state did.
Right.
And it makes it difficult for us to be put in a position where we are having to defend the state's case that we don't fully understand. And there's a lot of missing pieces for us. And that's the only way that we can justify his guilt. So it puts us in a difficult position of being like, man, you guys are really making us fight for your work that you did, that you yourself won't stand behind. That's a conversation that we have a lot as a family.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, you know, Steve, with what you said, and I hate to put it in these terms, but it summarizes exactly what you said. The end result justifies the means, right? It doesn't matter how we get to him through IGG because we have all of these bailout plans that we feel we can protect ourselves. Anytime law enforcement takes the idea or the process or the methodology that the end result can justify the means, we're in trouble. Because what happened with that is they created the situation, they realized how impactful it was now. And now the next 4 months of investigation is nothing more than trying to hide what they did at the beginning. And that's why we see the phone records were never analyzed because they didn't need the phone records. The phone records for AT&T were nothing more than a smokescreen so that they could say, oh, look, we got this tip, we followed up on the phone, we found this, and oh, that led us over here. The phone records were never gathered as a true investigative tool because they already have the narrative written. And whatever aligned with that narrative because of IGG, they brought in, and anything that contradicted that narrative, they eliminated. A really good point on this is they committed in the first search warrant to Bryan driving east on 270. Everything, and it repeats itself, on 50 different search warrants that he traveled east on 270. Bryan Kohberger was never on Highway 270 that night, ever. He took a route north of the airport. He actually crossed 95 north of Moscow, and then he dropped back down south on the east side of Moscow. And that's why he ends up on Indian Hills, is he actually came from the east. And he did that because he's smart enough to know about the cameras. What drove me
Before we get to what drove him crazy, do you guys remember when those Q-tips came out? I haven't seen them. Hi, Lori. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you, IAG, for keeping us up to date.
Crazy in this case is when you see him go back. And by the way, the reason he went south is he panicked. Dylan saw him. He saw Dylan. Reasonable minds would say 911 is being called. And you can see in the video when he leaves, he's leaving in a hurry.
Yeah.
If he drives back that same route, he's driving towards where Moscow PD is responding from. He's going to go right back towards the police department. So he has to go down south. When you look at 6 months worth of his records, he doesn't have activity down south. He doesn't know 95 south of Moscow. So he gets about 12, 13 miles outside of Moscow. He pulls over. There's a good gap there, which has always been a concern to me, where he sits there for probably 10 minutes. He powers his phone back on.
Yes, Salty Indian Hills finally explained. Yes, ma'am. Hey, Joey. Damn.
He goes into navigation mode.
I need to go back.
To go down south. When you look at 6 months worth of his records, he doesn't have activity down south. He doesn't know 95 south of Moscow. So he gets about 12, 13 miles outside of Moscow. He pulls over. There's a good gap there, which has always been a concern to me, where he sits there for probably 10 minutes. He powers his phone back on. He goes into navigation mode, and we see the route back.
It's crazy dark too. So the audience might not know what it's like out here in Idaho. You get out in that farm community, there's no lights. We don't have street. It's dark as anything. Your headlights are all you have and high grass. So it gets if you're not prepared for that, you're not going to be able to figure out where you're going. And without a phone, if that's your primary source of navigation, you're driving around like an idiot, for a certain amount of time.
Well, then, like I said, we've got 6 months of records. I've got a mapping system. I can put everything in there. I can hit a play button, and I can watch his phone for 6 months going around the map. What you see that morning of him coming back to Pullman, you never see in the prior 5 months of records. That's the first time he's ever done that route. And then within 48 hours, he's doing the exact same route again. And that's the last time you'll see him do that. You give me the layest of lay jurors, I can connect the dots there to have them see exactly what's happening. And right after he completes that route, he goes down to Lewiston, right down to the Snake River. He's there for less than a minute or two, and then he's right back to Pullman. Like, what's happening? Of course we know what's happening. I'm with you guys on the frustration. My apologies. Like, you guys should never have been in that situation. This is an FBI issue, and I'll frame this piece. I don't put this out publicly very often. When the plea deal was reached, I contacted the FBI CAS team, and I actually told them, hey, I did a lot of the investigation here. I know what the cross-examination that you guys were going to be subjected to looks like. You name your place, I'll fly to you anywhere in the country, and I will give you the full debrief of what I saw on my side and how we could get better. They never returned my call. So, even reaching.
I don't know what to think about this.
Reaching out saying, I'll give you as much insight from the defense perspective of this to be better prepared next time. They're just not interested. And the other thing that I will tell you.
Maybe they don't trust his work. Who is he to school the FBI, to be honest with you? I don't understand this.
You guys just drove me crazy. Now that my report's out, your guys' last name is all over that report because I did an inventory. I put in, hey, here's what the phones were provided. And then I listed the phones by last names. The only last names in my report that were redacted are the FBI agents that worked on this case. So all of the victims' last names are in this report that went out to the public with the last 4 digits of their phone, but the FBI agents get their last name redacted? Like, what is that? That is insane.
It's been happening a lot. It's really...
Doesn't the FBI always stay private? Exactly. The FBI is a one-way street, point blank. They're not going to listen to this guy who's saying, hey... I want to school you. The FBI is not going to do that. They're just not going to do that, in my opinion. I think this guy thinks he's greater than he is.
Oh, if you, off record, if you ever want to know about some of the worst, we'll let you know. But I won't propagate them here publicly.
I just want to go back for a second to something you said, Sai. So
yeah, like the FBI, no one tells the FBI to do anything or to learn something. It's just the way of the world.
So the A&W, which is that gas station right down the road from the house. So you're saying you mapped his phone and also, was it the victim's phones?
Thank you,
at
Bryan.
the same time there?
Correct. And there's movement where they're all in the area of the house before that. And then we see it pop up over by the A&W, but they're together. They're at least mapping, and they're mapping not the exact same lat longs. They're just slightly off, but they're within meters of each other, which is, for me, that's a tall tale sign that we're getting better accuracy, because sometimes the system will default if there's a problem with the system and everybody will get the same lat long ping for like a 5,000 meter radius, but all of the lat longs are identical. In this case, they're just slightly different. They're just a couple meters apart, and it's a pattern. It happens multiple times. There's also an incident, and it was the second, I'm going to screw these dates up, but I can give them to you guys later if it's important. It was the first weekend after school started, and I believe it was Kaylee and Maddie went to Pullman, and I believe there was some type of
Thank
a
you,
sorority,
Cindy.
maybe fraternity party, and it's in the apartment complex right next to Bryan Kohberger's apartment. And at one point, Bryan Kohberger's phone moves over to that apartment complex as well, and that's rare. He doesn't typically hang out in that complex, but this is all the way going back in August. That first.
Okay, when was the pool party? Was that possibly the pool party? Because he's giving all this information. He's saying August that the girls were at an apartment complex in Pullman. Was it Jazzy? Was it where Jazzy lived? You're good, Colleen. It's good to see you tonight. The pool party was August 28th, Vogue? Interesting.
Typically hang out in that complex, but this is all the way going back in August. That first weekend after school started, the phones intersect in Pullman.
Yeah, the prosecution was doing the exact same thing. They were trying to take his phone activity and cross-correlate it with the other people in the phone. They wanted to know who was in the house at a certain time because they wanted to plan the route to who was in there because they were trying to figure out who was the after. And Olivia can tell you the exact day that Kaylee moved in there. I think you said it was like May.
Yeah, into the King Road house. She did move in May.
Yeah, so other people speculated there was no one in the house or only
Oh, the pool party was at the Grove in Moscow, right? Trish J, good to see you. July 9th, I think.
only Maddie was in the house. We've never tried to play the blame game. We don't care about that. Who's to blame is BK, and we're holding him accountable. None of the victims. Like another thing I appreciate you saying is no cleanup. We've really chased that down because I mean they're literally driving these young girls to the point of they don't have a life anymore. So you're not true crime anymore. You're speculation, Hollywood fan fiction crap. And I would love for true crime to get back on focus and say, how do we make the world a better place? How do we make sure that people are coming together to actually have less murders and mass murders every single year? That's something we should work towards, not this fan fiction stuff. I mean, so that's part of the reason why we're here today. This is why we've been so dedicated. That's why we made a charity. This is why we have Murder Has a Name. We're doing everything in these girls and these victims' names, Ethan as well, and make sure that the world's a better place. Really, it's just the world's a better place when this is said and done.
Yeah,
You said no cleanup, Ty. I mean, right? That you
there's
think
no. He was in and out. We're talking minutes, and I'm limited on some of this information. There was some reenactments that I know were done, and the reenactments, this crime could clearly be carried out by a single individual, and it's 5 to 6 minutes. And if push ever came to shove, and that had to be proven in court, I know there's video out there of the reenactments. Like there is no doubt that this is a single offender. But on that point, and I think what you guys are hitting at, it's frustrating to see is, Turvey wants to say that there's cleanup because of things that are absent. Basically there's things that aren't in a bathroom, therefore it's indicative of cleanup. There's no evidence of what that bathroom looked like before or after. Like if we start building a case on that type of speculation, Bryan Kohberger's going to walk, right? That's just absurd. And I felt a deep obligation to call Turvey out. And, I'm going to piece something together for you guys. And I've been on the fence if I should.
Okay, he's on the fence about this next thing. Thank you, Penny, for the 5 memberships. If you received a membership, please thank Miss Penny. Thank you for your support. All right, he's on the fence. I don't know what he's doing, dude.
Voice this, but I think it's the right thing to do. So if I get in trouble later on, so be it. Don't get caught up in what I believe is a very rehearsed scam that is happening right now. If you look at what's happened over the last 3 months, let me help you guys connect some dots. Brett Turvey gets with Whitcomb, who's another idiot. Like the guy who's never investigated a homicide is going to be the armchair quarterback that's going to change this thing, right? So Turvey and Whitcomb partner up. Turvey becomes very outspoken about this. And what does Ann Taylor do? She publicly reprimands him and issues this cease and desist. If you think about what Turvey's saying Bryan Kohberger is innocent, that this is a big conspiracy, that there's other people. I mean, he goes as far as saying Dylan is potentially involved. How absolutely absurd. Yet Ann Taylor reprimands him from proclaiming BK's innocence. I come out with a book. I go around to law enforcement. Ann knows I told her I was going to go teach law enforcement. I have been very, very clear. I've always thought Bryan Kohberger is guilty. I think in 10 out of 10 courts in America convict this kid. Every single time we go to court, he gets convicted. The question is, does all the evidence come in because of some of the ways that the evidence was managed, which is a whole different conversation. But I am very outspoken that Bryan Kohberger is the guy. Why hasn't Ann issued a letter to me about breaching my NDA or all this stuff?
Does he want her to do that? I guess my question is, what's his end goal? What is this guy's end goal? Does he want to be publicly outed by Ann? Like, does he want this attention? I don't understand why he's doing this now. Make yourself available to the families. Why didn't they just do this privately? Right. How is he on the defense team? I don't understand this.
I will argue any day of the week. What I am saying is way more detrimental to the defense's case than what Bryan Turvey said, or Brent Turvey. And she did the one with Turvey. If you guys look at the picture, and here's the critical dates. The Thursday before the plea deal, Ann says in open court, Your Honor, I can't effectively represent my client if I don't get the continuation. So you have the primary attorney on this case saying in open court, it's one of the last statements she made before the plea deal, I cannot effectively represent my client. Those are not small words for an attorney to say in open court. And then
I wouldn't have allowed him.
72 hours later, we have a plea deal, and the way the plea deal came down, the way you guys were notified is disgusting. I've never seen that in 30 years. Like that, there's all kinds of craziness going on there.
We just learned that his family was there at the plea deal. His family was there, so they learned before we did. That's the disrespect.
What are you getting at, though, Si? If you can just connect the pieces of what you're trying to say a little more. I'm just trying to follow.
We have the ineffective counsel claim. We have the plea deal gets worked out within 72 hours. And Taylor stays on as Kohberger's attorney. Like this last year, she's the only person on the jail logs that was visiting him on a regular basis. He hasn't sought out new counsel. She's very much in his ear on a daily basis. We then see the Turvey Whitcomb book come out where, hey, there's all this conspiracy. Ann has to separate herself from that and says, oh, I don't agree with this. I'm going to reprimand you guys. Like, don't say these things. And now we see Bryan drop. And I knew the appeal was coming. In my book that I sent to the publisher in February, which is a manual, it's not a Bryan Kohberger tell-all, I put it in the book. Like, the appeal is coming. There's no doubt about it.
You called it before it happened.
And what I'm convinced about is Turvey and Ann are together on this. Turvey and Ann are not at odds. Ann needed some new information because that's the only way an ineffective counsel gets any legs at all. They need something new to get spun up. They need it to be very well known. And now there has to be this separation where Ann is helping Bryan, but not directly involved. And who takes that role is Turvey. So Turvey comes out, says all this nonsense. Bryan writes his thing. The last missing piece, and mark my words, I think we're going to see it in the next 60 to 90 days, Ann will absolutely fall on her sword for BK. She is a true believer. She believes he's innocent. She has an unhealthy relationship with him. And I think we're going to.
I think this is very unethical of him to do. I don't trust this guy. Why would he say this publicly? Dude, an unhealthy relationship with him. Is he trying to push along the ineffective counsel? Because that's certainly what it seems like to me. How is this helping the Gonsalveses? I don't trust this dude.
A true believer. She believes he's innocent. She has an unhealthy relationship with him. And I think we're going to see Ann come out in the next like 60 to 90 days, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the timeline. And she's going to eat the ineffective counsel. She's going to say he's right. I missed it. I should have known about it.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Big break moment. I just looked at it with a new lens, with this new thing. Yeah. I'm going to go even further. I'm going to let some stuff out of the bag. So I've talked to some authors, and so they actually have footage of
I mean, would you want to hire him after this? Would you trust him? I wouldn't. I feel like both of them are jokes.
BK boxing. He's an amateur boxer. There's they have a whole thing of him in the ring. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 162 punches. 160. That was going to be like, oh, he couldn't do 150 in 12 minutes. Now they have him in 3 minutes throwing blows of 162 times. So there was more than enough time. There was actually more time for you to go in and maneuver and do things, change clothes, whatever you did. There was time there, and they were going to show him physically doing it against another human being that was willing to fight him. And these people are sleeping in bed. They had a really good plan. Some parts they were going to execute really well. Other parts they didn't execute.
I think this whole thing is messy on both sides. I think the prosecution is messy, and I think the people that the defense had working on their side are messy. It's all we've seen come out of both sides. I just don't know if I trust this guy. I don't know. That's a pretty heavy thing to put out there about Ann Taylor, and I got to wonder why he would do that.
Cute as well. But to anyone who thinks that somebody could go in there, they didn't have enough time, you don't know your facts. They were going to show you to your face.
So you think, Sai, I mean, you would know, I guess you were on the inside, that Ann Taylor actually believes he's innocent and has an unhealthy relationship with him?
I am concerned about the ongoing communication, the protection, just that I don't know how else to explain it, almost as like a motherly instinct with.
How does he know this? Is he privy to their visits? I'm not a fan of Ann Taylor either, but he's putting some shit out there, and I gotta wonder why. What's his end goal? I mean, if he just wants to be a good guy and tell the Gonsalveses what he knows and work with them, why did it need to be on Brian Enton's show? Is he on Brian Enton's because this one 2 weeks ago didn't get the push that he wanted? I don't know. It's kind of weird to me.
The protection, just that I don't know how else to explain it, almost as like a motherly instinct with Brian. To Steve's point, 100%. The Kohberger family was way more involved on that plea deal than the victims' families ever were. I believe that there was conversations going from the jail in real time of this thing going down. There's no doubt about it.
He believes this, but where's the proof? Where's the proof of this? I mean, he's putting some pretty heavy things into these victims' heads. Does he know for sure that there was extensive conversations with the Kohbergers, or is he just assuming?
I believe that there was conversations going from the jail in real time of this thing going down. There's no doubt about that. But I've done a lot of these cases. I've done a lot of death penalty cases. It is very unusual for the defense attorney on the case, especially one who's technically a public defender, to stay involved and active with the defendant in prison visitations the year following a plea deal. That is incredibly rare. Like the case is done. No one is making contact with him. So the idea that it's all Ann and only Ann, and he hasn't obtained a new attorney for this appeal, to me is very telling. I think jail logs and jail calls would really expose a regular routine between Ann and Brian that they're visiting and talking on a weekly, if not daily basis.
I mean, I'm keeping an open mind, but these are a lot of assumptions. And I'm just wondering if he's got evidence of this. It's a lot of assumptions. And I don't find assumptions cool coming from professionals. I don't know. Here we go. You're glad he's speaking out?
Which is weird. Yeah, that's unhealthy in my opinion. As a criminal defense attorney, you got to keep that line between your clients, right?
Yeah, I was told by insiders that it's a small community we live in that said she's purposely after you, Steve. She's watching your interviews, making us all watch it together and coming up with discovery based off your conversations. And once I learned that, guess what? I started talking about Bluetooth. I started talking about other things and just put her on rabbit trails just to play chess with her. But
Okay.
I've heard some really
Oh,
unnatural things are going on in this case.
Is there evidence? I'll save Steve for a minute. On Olivia's cue. Is there? I'm just joking. Is there evidence, Sai, that we don't like know about that was never public?
I think there's definitely stuff that has been withheld and has still been withheld. I don't know how much it was conveyed to the victims' families, universally, not just Steve and Olivia, but across the board. There's some really disturbing things on his internet history that I don't know ever really came out that would be incredibly hard to just simply show and walk away from a jury not thinking that it's going to leave a big impact, especially on the case of this nature. I'm talking right now specifically his porn history. He's got a very disturbing porn history that
Ugh. We kind of figured this, didn't we hear this before? If you watch this guy's channel, he likes to talk about this kind of shit. Just saying.
I think really paints a picture.
and that's all non-consensual acts. And I also heard gay, male to male gay.
Oh,
Is that accurate?
I don't know on the gay stuff, and quite honestly, I don't mean this in the way it's going to sound. I'm not focused on the gay porn. For me,
I know what you're focused on.
yeah,
this is very uncomfortable. I am very uncomfortable sitting here.
I am very uncomfortable sitting here.
gay porn. For me,
I know what you're focused on.
for me, you hit it on the head, Olivia. The non-consensual, violent nature of the porn.
I was aware of terms drugged, raped, passed out, sleeping.
I would go more on incredibly violent sexual encounters. So not the sleeping or passed out, but very aware of what's happening and it being very, very violent, which is always a tough thing for a prosecutor, or I mean, sorry, a defense attorney to get through. That's something that's going to really tell a story about somebody's character. I think that there's stuff to still come out. I think you guys are going down the right road. I've quietly been watching, waiting for more to drop. I can tell you, for me, the location information and the pattern of life, it hasn't come out because I don't think they ever looked at it. And it is by far the most telling of what we have out there. By the way, the day after this, he turns the phone off again. So, again, they're trying to show these patterns and they do a pretty good job of showing, hey, prior to the murders, he turns his phone off on this days, but it's like they just stopped on November 13th. And as an investigator who's looking at a lot of crimes like this, I want to see what he's doing the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next month. Like that is a really critical period too, that we see very defined behaviors of suspects like this. And the very next day, he heads to Moscow, he turns his phone off, he turns it back on, and he's southbound on I-95. It's almost a mirror of what you saw the day before.
You guys are cracking me up in the chat. Here, we're going to pass around blunts and tequila for everybody.
Just a shot of tequila and a nice blunt.
Hi, Sarah Lee.
Barnhart said that they found a config file that they had to reproduce, and luckily they had the exact same phone. But basically, he went through a pattern. He turned off the Wi-Fi. Then I'm gonna mess this up, but he turned off the Wi-Fi, like airplane mode. Then put VPN, and then put VPN to only establish connections after start. And he did this whole thing, and that was brand new. He hadn't done that in the config files. That was the first time he did it, and they're going to bring that forward to say that this is a new behavior. Just same thing that you're saying, a new behavior that he did before and after, and he doesn't do it again. He stops coming back to the Moscow area after the murders. He doesn't go back there anymore. So anyone who thinks he's over there just shopping, they're like, and I guess the message really is to the world is you can't commit these crimes anymore and get away with it. And that's really what I'm trying to say is
Gummies
I just
work
learned
too.
recently with the labs I'm working with. I can't say this on regular TV. Rapes are getting very, very rare. People don't get away with rape anymore because there's the fluid exchange, and that's leading. Everyone's starting to learn. If I do this, I'm going to get caught, and we need that same message in these murder cases. And I don't know how to say that in a mainstream media format, but we got to. I'm
We're
trying
just
to
gonna
work on it.
thank your podcast, Brian.
Of course you can, Penny. I think Brian loves when the families talk about him trying to figure him out. He probably does, Leo.
Nenton.
What'd you say, Olivia?
So we're just gonna tank your podcast instead. My apologies.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So on that, Steve and Olivia, let me give you a name. Follow this case. I think it's really, really important. The name is Matthew Nilo, Nilo. So Nilo.
Okay.
Matthew is an attorney who was practicing in New York, but he went to law school in Boston. And in the early 2000s, when he was in law school in Boston, he was a serial rapist. And I want to say he had 7 victims that they've identified. About 2 years ago, maybe 3. Man, time's flying right now. Maybe a little bit longer. Just after these murders, they did the exact same thing. It's the exact same team with IgG, and they took some of the DNA from one of those rapes. They ran it through IgG, and like I said, it's the same team that worked on the Kohberger case, and they got a hit on Nilo. And they went and did the 1-to-1 comparison. They got it. They arrested him in New York. That case is working its way through Massachusetts right now. He's going to challenge the IgG, and he's going to win. The thing I want you guys focused on, because this is probably one of the more infuriating things. And if somebody's told you this, I'll shut up. But if they haven't, they are doing a huge disservice to all of the victims' families right now by not giving you guys the lay of the land. The defense is going to buy all the time they can until one of these IgG cases hits a major appeals case or the U.S. Supreme Court. When it does, you can kind of mark my words here. The rule is going to become you have to have a search warrant for IgG. You just have to. Most states have already started to adopt it, but this Nilo case is really likely. He's got the resources, the funding, and the knowledge to take this to the Supreme Court. If that happens, and they actually look at, hey, when you sidestep the search warrant and you step outside of policy, IgG is out. If that ever happens, that is Brian's gold card right there.
How is that his gold card, though? I thought they didn't need the DNA to prosecute this case. If he's saying I'm so confused. I might need to process this. I'm going to shut up. So he's saying in another case, the IgG is possibly going to get thrown out because they sidestepped protocols, which we know they sidestep protocols here. So if the DNA gets thrown out, he's saying that's Bryan Kohberger's gold card. But why would he have pled guilty if that was true? Why would you plead guilty?
Hey, when you sidestep the search warrant and you step outside of policy, IgG is out. If that ever happens, that is Brian's gold card right there. And I think that the defense, they're watching this case very carefully. They're waiting to see what happens with this. And everything you guys are going to see the next year or two is nothing more than buying time.
But would
He's
that
got
even matter if he pled guilty? I mean, it's not like he had a trial and then was found guilty, and then he could go back and say, oh, the evidence they used at trial against me, is unfair. Like he still pled guilty. But that had nothing to do with the IgG.
So here's the issues, and there's 2 huge issues here. And again, Steve, if somebody's explaining this to you, then I'll move on.
Well, I think, Vogue, what they're saying is they would have never gotten to his dad if it wasn't for the IgG. So that would put the sheath out, in my opinion. Thank you, Marcy, for 6 months. The best days spent right here with you, Jay. Thank you, Marcy. Appreciate your support. You know what I'm saying? They would have never found his dad if they didn't do the IgG. Right. We have blurry car pictures, spotty phone records. We have WSU and the car situation. Was this all part of his plan? I don't know. I think he did all of this on purpose as a mind fuck. And Allie Books, it's so good to see you. It's a tip only, not evidence. Right. We never really, I think that was speculation, Evelyn. Amazon purchases. Yeah, I don't know, man.
If not, like you guys, you have to be aware of this. The fact that the prosecution probably never told you about Garza versus Idaho. And
Hey,
Oh,
Llama.
yeah, we-
commit that one to memory. So Garza versus Idaho is a U.S. Supreme Court involving Idaho, where a guy who took a plea deal, who voluntarily pled guilty, actually got it reversed. And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court. So plea deals are not the closing of a case. Plea deals aren't like, okay, we're going to put this behind us. We're going to let everybody get closure here. Anytime a prosecutor frames a plea deal as closure, they're doing a huge disservice, because plea
Well, that's a good question, Salty. Did they find Dad through IGG? They won't say. Stay tuned. But we did hear that the FBI was on his tail for what, over a week?
deals get turned over all the time on appeal. The second thing, and man, I am not a Hippler fan at all. I think Hippler made a critical error when he made the ruling that IgG could come in as a tip, so be it. But the moment he prevented the defense from being able to expose to the jury that the lab techs willingly, knowingly violated their own policy to do it, it's not a constitutional issue. That evidence comes in, but it does become a credibility issue. And any other court in the United States, when anybody associated with law enforcement oversteps a policy as it relates to evidence, you got to explain that on the stand. And I think if the prosecution
Well,
did it right, you can.
I don't think this is the first thing that the FBI has done that is out of policy. I mean, I would be surprised if this was made such a big deal that the FBI did this. The FBI always does shit. They do whatever they want, and there's never any accountability for them. So will we ever know the truth? Because the FBI doesn't give it away. They don't give away their tactics, ever. So if they were following Bryan Kohberger across the country, I don't think they would ever tell us, because the FBI doesn't give away their tactics. Llama. I do see you, Llama. I hope you're having a good night. I don't know how it would matter since he pled guilty, says Lindsay, but this could get sticky down the road as far as evidence may go. I mean, this may get thrown out, and this may be a completely moot point, to be honest with you. He doesn't have a very good chance of getting a trial. People aren't getting it. I mean, I think we're trying to take away from it. When Gray went over this, he actually said that the government should put all prisoners' DNA into Ancestry. They have CODIS for that, Gray Hughes. Gray Hughes is so stupid. Gray Hughes is so dumb. They should take all the prisoners' DNA and put it in Ancestry. Dude, it's in CODIS.
Explain that. Hey, for the interest of justice, for X, Y, and Z, yeah, we made this tactical decision. But the moment that Hippler made the decision that the jury can never hear about any of that, and the defense is not allowed to cross-examine officers who knowingly, intentionally violated policy on one of the most critical pieces of evidence in this case, that is a judicial oversight. That in of itself, when challenged properly, has the ability to bring this case back. Now, to Steve, to your point, do it right. 10 times out of 10, he gets convicted and maybe more comes out, and it really does put some closure behind this thing. Bring back the death penalty. I am all for this. But I think that I don't agree with the national populace right now that his appeal doesn't have legs, and it's very unlikely it's going to happen. I think there's a couple things, and if it falls into place just right, it could happen. So I just say that as prepare yourself, right?
I've talked to some crazy labs, and there's some multi-billionaire. Okay, his house got broken into. Somebody stole his safe. Didn't just take it. Didn't just break into it. They took it. And long story short, his cigar was left behind. This guy hires a private lab to get a snip off of it, and then uploads it to all, and goes and finds the person who robs his house and shot his dog, which is like, it's like a movie, okay? And he gives it to the cops as a tip, and they said he basically arrested this guy and kind of is taking shit over it because he was supposed to handle it himself. So long story short, he starts his own company. And he's just going through certain locations that he's deemed as high risk, and they're just grabbing people's DNA and uploading it as if they own it. But once you abandon your DNA, you don't own it. So then they're making these databases to sell to the freaking cops.
Dude, that's crazy. That is crazy. Amanda. Oh my God, Amanda's Vita. How are you? Oh my God, let me come on camera and say hi to your mom. Hi, Amanda and her mom. Girl, how are you? It's been so long. Dude, Amanda's Vita is an OG. No, he's not talking about Othram. He's talking about a different lab. He didn't say Othram. Because once you abandon your DNA, it's not yours anymore. Yeah, it's crazy. It's so good to see you, Amanda. Thanks for coming in.
It's an I'm going to say he's a criminal, and this is a weird story, but I really don't know he was or not, or he was just a shady business guy. But he found a niche, and he's going in there because the database CODIS is puny. There's almost nobody in it. So they need to get to these bigger ones. And he found this niche, and they're like, we're afraid to work with this guy because we feel like this is going to get shut down. But this is the stuff that's going on, Steve. This is the wild, wild west of IgG.
What were you going to say, Olivia? Were you going to say something?
Yeah. So I guess that I just don't follow the logic completely. That this is not an appeal. This is a post-conviction relief. The relief that he's asking for is for his guilty plea to be removed. Let's say that it's all granted. That essentially puts him back on the trial court. Let's say that they successfully delay until the Supreme Court decision in which it is deemed to be unconstitutional for the IgG process. We're assuming that that's going to be then done retroactively then apply to this case. Let's assume that happens. Let's assume that IgG gets removed. It doesn't change his DNA being a direct match to the DNA on the sheath. So I guess I'm not following how we jump from...
Okay, I'm right on board with her. So I'm glad that she's asking these questions. Donald, yep, I guess if you put your trash on your curb, it's fair to get your DNA. It's crazy, right? Hey, Garden
These things happening. And I know you said that they're unlikely. You know, you were like, if these things all fall together. But I'm not following how these things all fall together to then have the IgG removed, which then puts us in a position where the case is at risk considering the DNA is a match. So maybe the work was ethically budged, but the work itself is good.
Yeah, so let me give you a couple things on that. The best case I can reference you to is Carpenter versus US. And what Carpenter is, it's a bank robbery case, so obviously not anything of the nature of what we're talking about here. But in Carpenter, they do some cell tower dumps, and they look at cell phone records, and they're able to place Carpenter at the scene of this bank robbery using cell phone records. But it's the FBI. And, in 2017, well, actually, the ruling's in 2017. The case actually happens about 2010, 2011. The FBI gets involved, and instead of using a search warrant to get the phone records, they use basically what they call an admin subpoena, which is a supervisor at the FBI saying, hey, this is relevant to a criminal investigation, give us the stuff. So Verizon gives them the records.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense, Salty. So it went originally to Idaho Lab. Then Idaho Lab sent it to Othram because they already had a contract. Othram got only so far in the family tree to like the cousins of Bryan. And then the FBI scooped it up and said, we'll take it from here. Correct? Am I on the right track? Let me know.
They put him at the crime scene. They recover some evidence based on the phone records. He goes to prison. It goes on. He finally gets his appeal. It goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And this was the first case in the United States that challenged, can law enforcement look at your location data without a search warrant?
Geo warrants?
Yeah. And basically the Supreme Court said, no, looking into your location data is so personal, it requires a search warrant. And this was the landmark case for cell site location information that requires law enforcement. And now everybody except for the FBI was getting search warrants for a decade before this because we all knew where this was going. But the FBI was doing it at that point.
So how does he have a claim?
So it reversed. It reversed the conviction because the conviction was based on the phone records, and the Supreme Court said, hey, you should have had a probable cause search warrant and you didn't. The phone records went away. So they had to retry Carpenter and prove the case without the phone records, which luckily they had a ton of evidence and they were able to do. So that's the first one is, should law enforcement have reasonably obtained a search warrant? And this is my hang up on the Kohberger case. And the answer is so simple. If law enforcement would have written a search warrant for what they were doing with IGG, it doesn't hurt anything. We can seal search warrants. I don't have to release it. I'm going to go back to my undercover days. We did a lot of cartel cases. I was a cop in Arizona, so we had a lot of cartel cases on the border. We used to steal cars to wire them with GPS because we needed to get access on the car to get our GPS in there, right? So we would literally order the key from the manufacturer, and we would go steal cartel members' cars, and then we would plant the GPS in it, and then we'd recover it and give it back to them. It's a great scam. We wrote search warrants to ourselves so that we documented what we were doing and there was transparency with legal oversight on our actions. When we allow the FBI to go through back doors and to kind of trick the system, and if you ask them, well, why didn't you write a search warrant to GED, match GED? Well, we didn't write the search warrant because they wouldn't have given us the info.
I think it was Heritage.
Well, it was Match
Heritage.
and Heritage, so both of them. So the idea there is, man, if they reverse that, and then you get Steve Nye, and you talk about somebody who should not have been involved with this case. If you guys haven't seen his, you know who Steve is?
Jeff Nye?
Jeffrey Nye. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jeffrey
yeah.
Nye.
Okay.
Oh my God. Is Steve Nye the freaking science guy? Dude. What? She's like, Jeff Nye? Oh, that's Bill Nye, the science guy.
You get Steve Nye, and you talk about somebody who should not have been involved with this case. If you guys haven't seen his, you know who Steve is?
Jeff Nye?
Jeffrey Nye. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jeffrey
yeah.
Nye.
Okay.
Yeah.
He did an interview in August with Fox News. You guys have to go watch this interview, and he explains the.
I think he actually told us in purpose because Christy Dawn asked him, "What do you worry about?" And he said the same thing.
Who?
And yeah,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
I've worried about. It's not so much him explaining because I agree with him. The entire case was hinged on the IGG. It's what he says towards the end when he says, and usually with these type of things, we can argue inevitable discovery. And what inevitable discovery is the Carpenter case. Yeah, we have these phone records and it helped put the case together, but take the phone records out, inevitably we still would have discovered all this stuff and we can prove the case. And that's why Carpenter is still in prison today, even though those records got thrown out.
Especially considering it went to Othram first and they found the right tree. They were on the wrong branch. And Leah Larkin herself testified in the Franks hearing that eventually it would have led to him.
100%. 100%. The problem is Jeffrey Nye on Fox TV during that interview said, we didn't even argue inevitable discovery because there was nothing that applied for it. And I'm like, dude, shut up. What are you saying? More importantly than even what Othram found, we have to remember on November 29th, Washington State University identified Bryan Kohberger and the vehicle, realized that he just swapped his plates for Washington plates, and notified Moscow PD. The idea that Bryan Kohberger would have been completely absent of this investigation minus IGG is
I'm sorry. I just love how the puppies are always all over Christy. It's so cute.
absurd. All they had to do was follow up on credible leads. That's it. That's all they had to do.
Okay. So yeah, I think that we're on the same page.
And I'm not saying I ever think this thing gets reversed. What I'm saying is if you guys, as the victims in the case, in all of the victims' families, if you're not being told, hey, this could be 5, 6, 8, 10 years before this thing works itself out in the criminal justice system, you're being misled. The Carpenter case, well, that was a 2011 arrest. That case came down in 2018. And that's just the appeals process. That's not even the initial case. So I think we're in for a very long ride on this. I think there's a lot of things that are going to still happen. I don't know that he's going to get his post-conviction relief. I think they're anticipating that. All that does is now it forces it into an appellate review. And it's the appellate review that I worry about.
Do you think that'll...
I guess I'm not understanding that point either. How does a post-conviction relief force it to an appellate court? Because he won't even get a hearing. His argument is nothing but ineffective counsel, which was asked in the plea questionnaire that he answered extensively to, as well as life in prison isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I was, quote unquote, threatened by the idea of death row. There's no other meat to...
Hair in Ethan's hand.
Oh, okay. Yeah, clumps of hair, which we know is completely fabricated. That's not reality. And his own defense, Ruth Ballard, testified on the 23rd of January that it was consistent with Ethan's own hair. So he can't say that that's exculpatory because obviously the prosecution didn't withhold that from them. So that doesn't work out either. So I guess I'm not understanding from how we get to he's not even going to get a hearing. Mark my words. Let's say that I'm wrong. He gets a hearing. How does that throw it into an appellate when he's not asking for his plea waiver to be removed? He's asking for his guilty plea to be removed.
He's not a lawyer,
I'm sorry.
He's an officer trying to help us.
Please, if you don't know.
No, I get it. I would be so frustrated. In fact, I would be like, just please release the guy. The only thing I ask.
That's why they won't talk to us.
That's how I feel.
He called her Yaya. That's so cute.
Just release. Let's just release him.
Yeah, they won't talk to us because these are the kind of questions that we give to Thompson, and Thompson just his eyes start darting.
But I don't think that it's not an unfair question. Like you said, I don't know that it's Cy has the answer, but that's what Olivia's asking is really the question. I mean,
here's the thing that we have to keep in mind: the post-conviction relief that he's seeking right now is going to go before Hitler, and I agree with you 100%, Olivia. He's going to turn it down. He's not even going to get a hearing. He can appeal that. This is where Garza versus Idaho comes in. He can say, hey, Hitler's already jaded on this. He's part of the problem. I need
the ladder
side of that initial team to look at this. It's a long road. They're going to have to file their stuff just right. At some point, he's going to have to get a real attorney to get on board. All I'm saying is if nobody's telling you guys that this is possible, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it's possible. That they're not prepping you guys. The same thing about, hey, if we take this plea deal, we can bring closure to this case. No, it just
exactly that they told us the opposite. They said if you guys go with Steve and go for the death penalty, you're going to have hell to pay. But if you just go with Thompson over here, all your problems go away, and he pleads to it, and you all just go riding into the sunset. And now they're all like, I didn't think he could appeal.
Hashing old news.
Yeah. What's that?
Hashing old news.
Well,
that's Dad.
We're still talking to people that are calling me. Like I just had Randy. He couldn't appeal, and we're like,
well, because it's not an appeal. It's post-conviction relief, and it's going to be denied. Because here's the thing: he could have requested relief in the form of having his plea waiver removed, which would have been a hell of a lot more likely for a judge to say, yeah, sure, whatever, have your appeals back. But he didn't do that. He asked for his guilty plea removed, which logically makes no sense, which is why I think Ann Taylor's not behind this at all.
I read something that Ann Taylor signed an affidavit today.
The relief that he's asking for isn't asking, if they're trying to buy more time, give him a route to appeals. Say, just remove my plea or just remove my appeals waiver. But you're trying to remove your guilty plea, which is never going to happen because of the questionnaire that Hippler gave him. It was incredibly extensive, and everything that he brings up in his motion was covered. So unless you're just like feigning amnesia, and unless he truly is just even more stupid than I thought that he was, and I truly thought that this man was stupid, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, and understand
like a toddler throwing a tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
Them turning down this first.
See, that I agree with her 100%. I think this is Bryan doing what Bryan can do from behind bars to stomp his feet and get a little bit of attention and fire up those Kohbergers.
Motion
Hey,
for the
Bacon.
post-conviction relief is another log on the fire for the bigger appeal issue. We're not done with these motions being filed. I think in the next 60, 90 days, like I'm saying, we're going to see a lot more start coming out of the woodwork. This is just step one to get that. There is a very
That's step one.
There is a very intricate, very well planned out road that the defense is going to go down here. We're just getting started.
Yeah, the minute they thought they were going to do a plea, they probably had a whole exit strategy to be like, this is what we're going to do. And they sold that to him.
So he's not selling out Anne right now? Anne's part of this?
Anne's me. This is just total.
You can just talk.
That's
Spitballing.
theory.
We're
That's
spitballing.
theory.
Yeah, we're just spitballing right here.
Yeah.
I've always thought the same thing, honestly. I'm like, how do we know that she's not in on this? Say, hey, we're.
But why would Anne want to be known as a lawyer who gave ineffective counsel if she was in on it? What would be the goal for that? What would be the goal for Ann Taylor to go through with this and have Bryan Kohberger claim ineffective counsel and win on that?
We're going to do this. Then after a few months, you're going to file, inadequate,
Ineffective
counsel.
An attorney saying, yes, I was ineffective. Like
exactly, Olivia. That's exactly what I said. Why would she be like, oh, yeah, I was ineffective? Why would she want that?
Counsel.
An attorney saying, yes, I was ineffective. Like you're looking at motions. You're looking at the evidence that was, attempted to be suppressed. You're looking at, there's so much more that goes into it than just an attorney being like, yeah, she's
essentially going to lay down on the knife, right?
I'm still stuck on.
Why does he think that she would lay on a knife for Kohberger? I don't know.
What Cy started this whole conversation with, and Christy wasn't here, but that if they had done more.
She could have a book deal just by being his lawyer. She doesn't need to go through all these motions to get a book deal, dude. She was his lawyer for years. It's not a book deal. That just doesn't even make sense. Why would she throw her reputation away for Bryan Kohberger? Don't you think she has a reason to write a book just being his lawyer, though? Why would they need this big to-do?
Digging and processing with the digital stuff that Cy believes that there's evidence that Kohberger was in the living room at King Road based on the data he had. Like, did you guys know that? Did I just miss that somewhere?
I knew he was following these girls and stalking them online, but they refused. Nobody investigated if there was an online connection. There's no.
Are we talking about that night? That night he was in the living room?
No, Cy thinks previously. Based on
Okay, so here's Christy. That night he was in the living room? No, Cy thinks previously. Thinks. No dates. This is weird to me.
Night he was in the living room?
No, Cy thinks previously. Based on the data that he has from the defense.
So fucking terrifying.
Out because we just skirted on past it.
Sorry, I've been thinking about that.
No. You're right.
I'm like, did I miss that somewhere and you guys secretly knew, or I didn't?
I'm going to go a little bit off script here too, and I could be wrong. And this is where I was asking about the VICAP report and all the questions to family and friends, which I can't find any reporting being done.
Never happened.
The little bit that I have dug into, I also believe it's possible that Bryan Kohberger could have been at that house at certain times and not necessarily even been noticed. I think he could have blended in very easy. A large group of guys specifically, but a large group of college kids hanging out in, near, around the house may not have triggered what everybody thinks necessarily. I'm not saying that there's evidence of him breaking in the middle of the night and snooping around the house. I believe there's evidence of him late at night being at, near, or in the house, but it's also at high traffic times in that general area. And I believe he could have blended in really easy. The other thing I'm going to throw back to Steve that is just mind-numbing to me.
Okay, well, we already knew that Bryan had driven by the house and been in that area before. That's not new news. We all knew that. We all kind of speculated that he could have been in the house during a party when there was a lot of college students there. I just don't think this is his opinion. He prefaced this with, I could be wrong. So I don't know. Right. I mean, we all kind of speculated this.
It in really easy. The other thing I'm going to throw back to Steve that is just mind-numbing to me is there is a pattern of him looking at multiple houses. I believe he's a serial killer. I believe that was the intent here, was he was going to start his serial killer spree, if you will. And one thing you have to understand about the psychology of serial killers is part of what drives them, part of what fuels what they're doing is the randomness of selecting victims.
Well, was it really random? Tell us what the other locations were, sir. Were they all sorority houses? I mean, this is weird. He could have put on a ball cap and definitely fit in. We've seen Bryan Kohberger wear many faces, kind of like Lord Matthias. He can look very different at different times. We've seen it in all of the pictures. I do believe that he could have played the part. And I do believe if there were enough kids that he could have, with all these drunk kids, definitely being the sober one. No, I think this guy has an associate's degree. If I go back to my deep dive on him that I did 2 years ago, I think he has an associate's degree or something. I definitely think he could have fit in, though.
Watching victims and thinking in their head what they could do. That is a huge piece of serial killers. And I think he had multiple targets throughout the entire Moscow, Pullman area.
Thinks he had multiple targets. When people are wasted, they're not really gonna, I mean, you could walk through the house just to get a feel of the layout. I didn't say he hung out there, but he could have definitely walked through the house just to see the layout of the house. And these kids playing beer pong, drinking games, they're wasted. They're not paying attention to some dude that just randomly walks through. No one gives a shit. Think about it.
And when you look at his phone at night, that's what he's doing. He is going around hitting these different houses, watching people, interacting with them potentially. I cannot find any history where somebody's taken the phone records and mapped out all these locations and then gone to law enforcement reporting to say, hey, what reports of a prowler, suspicious person?
So he's saying they didn't look at where other places he sat and compared it to the blotters. Well, we did. We pulled up all the Moscow PD blotters. We pulled up all of them. Remember? I was FOIA-ing shit.
Stalking type behavior. Like, just give us all the calls for service in these different areas and see, can we match up? Hey, he keeps going back to this other house on the northeastern side of Moscow. Oh, weird. The neighbor across the street has called in 3 times about a white car. Like, how does that change this?
Well, remember when we looked up all of the blotters and there was a female who someone was in her house? Remember that one? There was a female who felt that someone was in her home. There was another female who called 911 that someone was trying to open her door. Remember all those reports? There was a lot of creepy shit. How about the knife attack on Paradise Park? And what is it? Paradise whatever? The knife attack where they sent out a vandal alert that kids were approached by a guy on a bike with a knife. How about the neighbor's car being broken into and her luggage gone through? Lots of weird shit was going on around there.
This investigation dramatically. And these are some of those things that I keep saying are just completely absent from this investigation. And the only reason I'm saying all of this part, Olivia, is I want him to get the appeal. I say, let's bring it on, get a new trial, but let's do it right. Let's get the right investigators involved, and let's go.
Jim Miller, I'm with you on that one. Courtney Stauffer. And remember, they were investigating Bryan for that other woman. God, what was her name? That was pulled back real quick from Bryan Etten. What was her name? The woman that was found dead in his town there. Dana Smithers? Dana Smithers. Oh, lovely. That is scary.
Go show the world just how depraved this guy was. Let's bring back the death penalty, make it happen. I worry that they don't do that and they fall back on this. Well, he's not going to get the appeal. We're not worried about it. Oh, crap. He made the first hurdle. He's not going to make the second hurdle. We're okay. We're okay. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in a position 5 or 6 years from now that there is a real possibility of a new trial and they haven't done anything to patch the holes from the first round. And that's where I've been very vocal with anybody who will listen. The time is now to start this investigation over, to do it, just document it, get it done. It's not a crazy expense. I mean, we've done everything at our own expense. I probably have about 50,000 invested in my Kohberger nonsense at this point. Like, there's people like myself and other people and stuff that you guys are doing that you can do this the right way. I think it's all about getting a mental mindset of where this thing can go, being very real and truthful with the victims' families to explain, hey, here's a number of scenarios. And even if it's a 1% chance, it's something that we need to discuss. And hey, how do you combat this? If lightning strikes twice here, how do we make sure this guy never walks? Because that, at the end of the day, is the real goal here. This is why I've been so outspoken, is we can never allow somebody like this to walk, especially if
four murders. The FBI told me, they looked at me like, Steve, I know you're concerned, but do you think somebody with 4 murders is going to walk? We have to do everything perfectly. And it was crazy that when you told me that you felt like there was more mistakes on that side, I was just like, and that was the side I was almost going with. If the other families would have told me, kick Kaylee out and you guys go do your own thing, I would have, but they were like, no, we want you to be the loudmouth and pretend like we don't like you. But the truth is, if you're not here, we're all in fucking trouble because now we got to get our heads out of the sand,
Yeah.
So you don't think it was just...
Make sure I hit your points there.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Christy?
So
wait, hold on.
You don't think it was just...
Hold on a second. Jim Miller, you interviewed who? I interviewed him for a job on the Friday before Courtney disappeared. I believe he went to the fair there where he was dark. Wait a minute, Jim Miller, you interviewed Kohberger? Noto, that's a really good question.
Sometimes I think that people just put too much thought into it. And I think, look, he happened to spot one of the girls.
I talked to Kevin from the Idaho Statesman. I don't think he believed me. Really? What did you interview him for? What kind of job, Jim Miller?
At some point in time, he started following them to their house, started watching them, found out that it was, a house full of girls, perfect for him, score, everything that he was, really needing and wanting. And he, started planning on, murder. and obviously had his knife and whatnot. And finally that night he just pulled the trigger and went in. I mean, like I don't understand why everybody thinks it's so elaborate. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, because that house is a dead end road surrounded by other houses. Okay.
yeah.
But here's the thing, Mom. He decided back before he ever moved to Washington that he was going to kill someone. He decided way back when that he was going to kill multiple someones if he was able to continue getting away with it. Okay. He walked into that house after 1. He didn't walk out after 4. He didn't anticipate this. He thought he'd be way better at it than he was. But part of his game is that he's a hunter. So it gave him an adrenaline boost to see them out in public, to follow them without them knowing, to do these things, until that was no longer giving it. That drug hit wasn't enough.
I totally get what she's saying. He was following them. He was getting off on it because they didn't know. And then it got to a point where that wasn't enough anymore. And he got ballsy. You had a dark conversation with Kohberger? Jim, why don't you email me? Here's my email. The weekend Courtney disappeared. Have you talked to the police about that, Jim? Olivia is their daughter. That's their oldest daughter, Ange.
Until 100%. It just kind of became this. He knew he had to do this. There was no getting out of it. He had a separate bank account with money that he had put in there that he hadn't touched, and he was broke as a joke. It's not like he had a ton of money to spare. Starts using it in cash.
Fantasy fund.
Fantasy 101, because at the end of the day, he's just an addict. And the drug that he's chased has always just been different. First, it was health and workout and this and that. And then it was, this grandiose that he's healing his, autoimmune disorders because he's so smart and this and that. And at one point it was heroin even. He's an addict that has always been obsessive and addicted to something. And he became addicted to this idea of chasing this high of killing someone. It wasn't personal to him.
100%. You couldn't have said that better. 100%. I agree with you.
Totally agree.
And if he ever does walk, he will kill again.
Yeah, of course he will.
We know they investigated him back in Pennsylvania, and it didn't go anywhere, but they definitely were concerned.
Yeah.
No, well, I escalated his predatory behaviors until they no longer fulfilled his needs.
So I didn't get Thorn Road right, but was that close? Was that closer than Payne's little loop?
Oh, stop it.
That's terrible. It's about, if you look at where Thorn is and the road comes down at kind of 95 dog legs around.
Okay.
Dog leg, it starts to go straight again. It's the third dirt road after that one. There's a farm that sits right on 95 right there. And that's where he worked his way back up to Thorn. And then he came back down. So he goes across up to Thorn Creek and then back down around. And he actually shoots out back onto, I think it's 195.
Well, it's definitely close. And AI helped me because I was trying to pull the timestamps all together with the 448. And 448 was my source of truth.
That he was stopped there. Ray said that he was stopped there for about 10 minutes. We never anticipated that long of a gap that he was stopped there. We always 1 to 2 minutes. So the timeline that we had
gone farther down than he's probably needs to be.
Yeah. So it's
from the house to where he stopped, I want to say it was like 14.5 miles. And you saw the rate of speed he was leaving the neighborhood at. I have no reason to believe he's not driving 65, 70 probably on the road. There's a solid 10 to maybe 15, depending on how fast he drove. And again, the part I can't stress enough is he goes back to that exact same spot where he stopped the next night. Yeah,
because he dumped his stuff right
he
there.
Did?
He goes back.
Holy
and then goes to the Snake River.
And then as soon as he's there, he goes down to the Snake River. And he doesn't spend any time. He goes to Snake River, and then immediately he's back up 195.
So you think he left the stuff there and went back and got it the next day and then dumped it in the river?
Yeah, and I'll give you guys my theory. I would be really interested in your feedback here, but looking at everything that I've seen, I believe Maddie was the target. I believe Maddie is who he interacted with earlier. There's some other things that kind of support that. I hope a lot of this comes out at some point. I think.
Sorry to know, but why do you say some things to support that? Is that the cell phones?
Yeah, there's a lot more collisions between Bryan's phone and Maddie's phone than any of the other victims. And what I'm saying about collision is they start to occupy the same space at the same time. And there is a little bit more of a pattern to that than with the other victims.
And what do you mean, though? I know you don't have all the data in front of you, but like in different locations, or like where
I would say August 28th, but I could be wrong if that's a Sunday. The first Sunday after the full week of school starting in August.
Why didn't he come to this interview with the dates in front of him?
It's Maddie's phone that I think interjects with his phone in Pullman, and this is the apartment complex right next to Bryan's. And they start off at like the student center at WSU, and then they move up to an apartment complex. And I think there was an interaction there that could have been the first crossing of paths. There's multiple times around the house that A&W over time, but consistently it's more with Maddie than the other roommates at that point.
He dips into his fantasy fund and Kaylee's up here. And it was like that's the moment he's going to plan this murder, and she's still down there and Kaylee's up here hanging out with us. So I totally agree, but I can't say that in a forum.
Okay. So what he just said basically is that Kaylee and Bryan's phones meet up more so than anybody else. However, they're saying, Kaylee was up at our house and he was dipping into his fund, buying his stuff for the murders. And if he was watching, he would have known that Kaylee wasn't there, right? That no one else would be upstairs, maybe?
And you guys know better than I would. I think the fact that Kaylee is in the same bed as Maddie that night is somewhat of a fluke. Like, right, that wasn't something he could have predicted. So what I believe starts as a targeted one victim thing very quickly rolls into two. I think Xana interrupted that. And I think there's great
That's the scream.
Well, the screen, but also there's really good. So before, in my prior life, before I started doing a lot of the phone stuff, I did a lot of homicide stuff. I was a blood spatter expert. There is excellent blood spatter in this house. In my opinion,
wait, he's a blood spatter expert too? How many expertises does this guy have? What? Maddie and Bryan. I didn't mean to say Kaylee. Sorry. If I said Kaylee and Bryan, I meant Maddie. Because Kaylee was at home. I'm sorry if I misspoke. My apologies.
So before, in my prior life, before I started doing a lot of the phone stuff, I did a lot of homicide stuff. I was a blood spatter expert. There is excellent blood spatter in this house that, in my opinion, Xana not only interrupts it, but he chases Xana through a big portion of the house. And that's where Xana comes into, and then Ethan comes into. And to your guys' point of the physical side of this, he's just exhausted by the time he sees Dylan. And that's why Dylan's today. And this changes his plan. And this is really important for the investigators to wrap their head around. The route back was going to be the same route that he took there. I believe he was going to go right back out on Indian Hills, up north to that little crossover road, and then come back north of the airport back in, because he can get all the way to his house and never pass a video camera other than the Indian Hills one. But because 911 is being called, he drops down to the south. So yeah, I think it went from 1 to 2 to 4 very, very quickly. Then there's the interruption, which completely throws him off his plan. He doesn't know what to do, but he's smart enough with everything he has on the criminology side, which, by the way, I completely agree with you, Olivia. He is a terrible criminal. His PhD program is
a box of rocks.
Yeah, but he is smart enough to know they may be looking for a white car. I shouldn't go driving back up through campus driving a white car with a car full of
and the path that you were talking about where he went, I think Indian Hills Road, everything he did was misdirection. So he didn't want to come in from west to east. He wanted to come from east to west. He was playing the same game. So if he did get caught, he wanted it to appear like he was coming from the opposite direction of where he really came from.
Right. Yeah. I do have to go.
Okay.
But I just want to.
All right, guys. Man, that was awesome. I really appreciate Cy. And Bryan, Thank you for putting this together. It wasn't a gotcha. It was organic.
Yeah.
Talking with people. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you for
I
honestly
appreciate all
having
of
such
you.
a platform where I do genuinely feel like we have said more in this than we've ever really said publicly. And that's honestly 100% due to you and how you choose to, you know, be a journalist and the open environment that you foster. And Cyree, I just wanted to say thank you. You know, it is what it is. I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate your time more than anything else. Just being able to, you know,
Well-
talk with us and meet on a playing field together.
My little 5 minutes that I have, I'm literally going to go to bed with nightmares now because of the hearing him say that he was in the living room and then hearing him say that he went back to that same spot the next night. I mean,
This
I'm
is
like,
his thought. This is him thinking out loud.
I know,
This is heavy for Christy, man. She's going to have nightmares tonight now.
nightmares now because of the hearing him say that he was in the living room and then hearing him say that he went back to that same spot the next night. I mean,
This
I'm
is
like,
his thought. This is him thinking out loud.
I know, but that just terrifies me. I'm like, oh my gosh, and that he.
Mom, there's literally not a single thing scary about him. He's the biggest pansy coward
He's a
ass that you
pussy.
could ever
He's a
imagine.
pussy.
The
Like,
I love Olivia. There is nothing scary about him. He's a pussy.
girls were
literally,
scared.
Well, of course,
yes, the
because
girls were scared
they were
because of his
vulnerable.
mom, and he doesn't
Monsters
have an
prey
illusion
on vulnerable
anymore.
people.
Yeah, and same thing, Brian. Thanks for having me on. And I'll throw this out, Steve. I talked about it earlier, and Olivia, it goes to you as well. And if you're okay with it, Steve, I'll just respond back to that. Yeah, I have your email on, I think, the questions that they sent over, that Courtney sent over. I'll respond back to you. I'll give you guys my contact and my phone number 24/7. Anything you guys ever need, or if you need to bounce anything off, let me know. I'm more than happy to sit down anytime, have as many conversations as you want. If there's anything you guys are doing foundation wise or trying to promote some of the change you guys are talking about, I'm super interested. Let me know how we can help if we can. I can't emphasize enough, we are really trying to push this as a really intense training for law enforcement on how to never fall for this trap again and how to prevent a lot of these things. We're getting an excellent feedback on that. So rest assured, the overwhelming majority of the law enforcement community that I'm working with sees where you guys are coming from. Their heart goes out to you guys. The victimization that you guys have been re-victimized by the process is one of the goals I've always had of trying to prevent. Like, how can I? And that's one of the things I got involved with this case on. It wasn't to ever be Bryan Kohberger's defense expert. It was to keep my ethics and say, look, criminal investigations can never look like this. And if those of us who see it and understand it don't stand up and say something, who does? So
I agree
again,
with
any pain or suffering that I have caused or helped happen with this nonsense, please understand, Anne has never spoken for me. Things that Anne says is not what I said. But my apologies for that if it's caused you guys heartburn, and anything I can do to be of assistance, I'm yours. So for what that's worth.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you. We
right.
do appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank you so
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
good
Thank
night,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, Brian. It's good to see
Bye,
you.
Christy.
Thank you,
All right, so I
Amanda.
really appreciate.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that. Are your guys' brains spinning or what? Whew. Olivia has a lot on her shoulders, for sure. Do you guys want to watch a little bit of this and see what he says on this one? I don't know how much I can handle, but this is custody queens off the clock. Never seen them, but it says we sit down with Cyree, the 30-year homicide investigator, federal expert witness and defense expert in the Bryan Kohberger case, who says the plea deal wasn't about certainty, it was about exposure. Cy, the author of The Truth Line, the framework of behavioral fusion. Let's see what this is. Examines the Kohberger investigation, the Karen Reed trial, and other high-profile cases. Okay, let's see what this book, where we can get this book. Oh, he just released it July 14th. This is new. So this is brand new. Hold on. Oh, this is, dude, that's a 2-hour long stream. Fuck that. Here, okay. Anyways, that has 109 views 2 months ago. It ships June 2026. Someone said America. Yeah, I don't know, guys. Anyways, let's go over here. Let's watch a little bit of this.
Every single type of record that was available to law enforcement through a search warrant process of any cell phone carrier in the United States. We also did a handful of this work all over the world, so it wasn't just the United States. In 2021, LexisNexis purchased that company, and I have kind of a 5-year non-compete that I did at that time. And during that non-compete time, the only thing...
Oh, that's right. He had a company. Hi, Bella. He had a company that he sold to LexisNexis. Yeah, he has his own software. Exactly, Black Hawk Down.
Thing I was doing was testifying in cases such as this case. But between my investigation time, between my time of running the company that did the cell phone tracking, and then the last 5 years since selling that company, I've lost count. I probably testified about 150 times, maybe a little bit more now, as a subject matter expert on one particular thing or another. But I'm very familiar, obviously, with the cell phones.
He did not give a date to when he was in the living room. He said it was prior to the murders. Mark and Betty, wake me up when Einan gets arrested for this. Candace, hello. He told us he spent $50K on this case. He's got Bill Nye. Okay, hold on. I'm going to get the transcript. I can't listen to him. I just want to hear the part about Kohberger and Taylor. Okay, let's see. Let's get rid of that.
As it relates to homicides. So it's kind of a very condensed Reader's Digest version, if you will.
Okay, great. And you've testified in both state and federal court.
I have. I think I'm at 26 or 27 states altogether, and yes, both state and federal.
Okay. And then for the Idaho case, was this the first case where you were an expert for the defense?
This is the first and only case I've ever testified on behalf of the defense, or that I actually did work on the case on behalf of the defense. There's other
So he usually works for the prosecution.
times that I've been compelled to do things with the defense, but this was the first time I actually testified as a defense expert. I was retained as a defense expert to testify.
Okay. And you were retained in October of 2023?
Closer to November. I think the first
If he was retained, wasn't he paid? Or did he do it for free?
time I got a call, but I didn't know what case it was on because of the gag order. I received a call from another expert who was looking for a peer review of this. But because of the gag order, he couldn't get into details of the specific case. So I agreed to do this case without knowing what case it was. And then it was a couple weeks later that I received the documentation on the gag order and kind of got up to speed that, oh, it's that case.
Gotcha. Okay. And is that Tom Slovensky?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then, so once you signed, I'm assuming, the confidentiality, you jumped on the case, you started to get into the case. What was your scope or retention like in that case?
Yeah, and this is probably, I probably left something out in my background that I should have included that I think you guys find very relevant, is from about 2010, it started in 2008, but by 2010, it was really rolling. I was teaching investigative methodologies for cell phone mapping geolocation to law enforcement. In 2014, I started the first subject matter expert certification course for state and local law enforcement. It was the first one in the nation to do that. Today, there's about 200 subject matter experts that have been certified within the court as a subject matter expert in geolocation as a result of taking that course. the idea of me receiving a phone call from another expert doing a peer review, it's kind of like a Tuesday. It was not a big deal. And the majority of times when I get those type of calls, I'll look at a case, I'll make a couple corrections, I'll give some advice, and I'm out. I really don't get involved with the case. And I fully did believe when I first was contacted on this case, this would be the same. I had every reason to believe that when I saw the work product, if anything, there's a few minor issues, point those out, and I move on. I have nothing to do with this madness.
What got you sucked
Was there
into
anything? Oh, sorry. Was there anything, Cy, that was telling you morally, ethically, or any other reason to take this case or become an expert? And I think it's important to.
Yeah, this is the same guy, Ange. This is Cy Ray. This is 2 weeks ago, July 16th. He did this one.
To note that you were not paid for any work that you did on this case, including
Not
reimbursements.
paid.
Isn't that correct?
Yeah, there's something to be said there that, I had to travel to Moscow a number of times. I covered all my own costs. I've spent thousands of dollars of my own money. And the only reason I bring that up is I hear a lot of things that, I was in this for the money. I've never been paid a dime on this. I refuse to be paid by the defense on this case. And that's not uncommon. Some people might be saying, well, why would he do that? The overwhelming majority of cases that I've taken on, I haven't been paid on. I would say probably close to 60 to 70% of my expert testimony in court is not paid testimony necessarily. So it's actually very common because I have students or other law enforcement officers who've been through my courses who are seeking guidance and assistance for one of their cases. And typically I do not charge for that assistance.
So when you reviewed the paperwork, Slavinsky called and said, hey, can you look at this? I think you met with Ann. Was there anything in your gut that was telling you not to take the case or the other way, vice versa?
I would be lying if I didn't say there was a moral dilemma. I've always been a prosecution witness, and that is mainly because I've always been part of the investigative effort to bring forth charges, not necessarily defend a case. So it wasn't necessarily by design or choice. It was more by that's just the role that I played in the past. Initially, like I said, I didn't feel like I would have a very big role in the case. I would have just some minor, edits and be out of it. When I saw the scope, and probably a better word is the magnitude of what was happening in this case, yes, I did feel a moral obligation. I've spent the better part of my career, and I can easily say the last 15 years, really trying to establish geolocation as a scientifically sound and reliable methodology that can be used in court. We have solved an incredible, and I say we, I'm talking, the law enforcement community in general, has solved a lot of really heinous, critical crimes using geolocation information. So it's important that we show that it's reliable. It can be upheld. In this case, it was very quick summary that I realized I was dealing with a case where the end result justified the means. And therefore, yeah, there was a moral obligation of a standard that I felt that I had taught and put out there for law enforcement and spent a lot of time in court showing the scientific, reliability of it was being challenged or was at stake. And that's a ripple effect that, impacts the entire criminal justice system, not just a case in Idaho. And that was the moral obligation, if you will.
Ron, you had a question?
Yeah, you got kind of two levels of the participation in the investigation here. You've got what was done by the local law enforcement, and then you've got what was done by the FBI. What was it that drew you in that led you to say this is bigger? I need to be part of this. This is a bigger issue or bigger problem than I initially thought.
Boy, that's a loaded question. The entire investigation. You'll have to interrupt me a handful of times today to make sure that I'm defining for your audience certain terms that I'm using. I consider this case was ethically corrupt. And what I mean by that is the entire investigation. So where I understand your question of, hey, was it more on the state side or was it more on the federal side where you're seeing the errors? The problem is the commingling of effort in this case was so tight. It was the entire case. A couple bad decisions that were made on the federal level infected the entire investigation. So I don't know that I can separate those two, and I know there's a lot of discussion about, is there a bad actor? Is this intentional or is it accidental? And I want to be really, really clear with something because I think a lot of people love to put things in my mouth or assume what I'm trying to say with certain things. I do not believe that there's anybody at Moscow Police Department that intentionally misled or misrepresented a case. I think they all were out there doing the best of their ability. Now, if somebody wants to say, well, their abilities kind of suck, there's arguments there that I can't engage in because, yeah, things could have been done better. But I don't think there's intention. And it's very limited. So when I say at the federal level, I want to make it very clear. I'm not saying the federal involvement across the board, but at the federal level, there's a handful of decisions that were made by a small group of people that are terrible decisions. And they were intentional decisions. They knew what was at stake. They knew what was being risked. So, I think that's different than what I'm seeing with local law enforcement, if that answers your question. The other concern that I had very quickly was, a lot of times when we get involved with a case like this, the prosecution can typically be just as surprised as anybody else by some of the actions or activities that took place in an investigation. And typically prosecutors are having to deal with and try to figure out how to explain certain things that happened within the investigation. This is a case where that is not the case. The prosecution team was incredibly involved and co-situated with the investigation pretty much throughout the investigation. So there wasn't this opportunity, if you will, where we have law enforcement acting in a bubble and then delivering this package to the prosecution team, who now is trying to solve how do we take this thing to court. These decisions are mutual. They were done in a group setting. And my personal opinion is they were really bad decisions. And some of them were made intentionally.
Okay, so first he said it wasn't intentional. Now he's saying some of them were intentional.
So we're going to go through this. We're going to go through each area line by line. But I know when I was looking at your sworn affidavit, and I want to actually read your words, but your comment or what you put in the affidavit was so incredibly powerful. You said such a deliberate attempt to mislead the court on evidence in such plain sight. I mean, those are extraordinary words. Can you tell us a little bit what led to you making that statement in your affidavit?
Yeah, and this is probably a really good time to start clarifying a lot of information that's out there that there's a lot of assumptions surrounding. So that piece that you're reading right there is specific to the timing data in this particular investigation. And timing, when we talk about timing and now the timing data, timing is everything. My report is now public, so I can discuss some of the things that are in my report. And what's important is the date range. In my report was dropped. The prosecution had read that report prior to me writing that affidavit and prior to the motion that caused me to write that affidavit being filed with the court. In that motion, there was a statement that AT&T did not produce AT&T timing data in 2022. Therefore, there is no timing data to turn over. Anybody who reads my police report will see that not only did AT&T produce timing data in 2022, law enforcement, with the assistance of prosecutors, had already obtained AT&T timing data in 2022. Two of the victims had AT&T. One of the early investigative leads had AT&T. They received AT&T timing data on all three of those phones. They also did what's called an AT&T timing dump, where they received just a general area, all of the AT&T devices in that area, and that was done in timing as well. So when the prosecution team wrote a motion and filed it with the court that AT&T did not provide timing data in 2022, they were literally sitting on AT&T timing data of over 3,500 devices in discovery. There is a complete disconnect from the prosecution understanding their own evidence is what that showed me.
A complete disconnect from the prosecution understanding their own evidence. Welcome in, everybody. If you haven't hit the like button, please do so now.
Just have never seen that far of a deviation. And there's a couple things that are really important. I'm sure some people are wondering, well, why is the prosecution so involved with this? In the state of Idaho, the type of search warrants that they were seeking at times actually require a prosecutor to sign off on. So it wasn't that the prosecution team was overextending their role into the investigation. There's actually a legal requirement that law enforcement writes and drafts the search warrant for these records, prosecutor reviews it, signs off on it. And
wait, these two blondes think that?
Then it goes to a judge. So the same prosecutor who signed off on the search warrants to obtain timing data, who signed off on the search warrants requesting Bryan Kohberger's timing data, same prosecutor who had received emails stating the FBI has clearly said timing data exists, is the same prosecutor who wrote a motion a couple years later that timing data doesn't exist. And I've never seen that far of a deviation in roles, if you will.
And that prosecutor would be Jennings?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's why when you say there's clear and convincing evidence that not only the FBI was able to obtain the AT&T advanced records in 2022, they did so with knowledge of the prosecutors in this case, that's what you're referencing. So when they're saying they weren't able to get it by that time, they were.
Yeah, it's in evidence. I mean, to this day, there are AT&T timing reports that have been turned over that were disclosed from 2022 that clearly exist.
Was there ever an explanation given for the disparity in what was said?
Yeah, and timing's real important here. The initial motion is filed that this doesn't exist, and there will be testimony from the FBI and or AT&T to confirm it. I wrote my affidavit. I actually got my affidavit signed off and got everything done. Remember, I'm in Arizona, so I have to send it to Idaho.
So these women just started a channel and they're pro burgers. They just came on the scene and they're pro burgers. Who set them up on here? They seem like shills.
About that time, the state drops a second motion clarifying, oh, wait, we just discovered timing data does exist. So what I wrote in my initial affidavit is true. It does exist. However, AT&T is now saying it only goes for 7 days.
and therefore it's not relevant. And I would still argue it's incredibly relevant. It's ground truth for what a device is doing that we are applying a pattern of life analysis to. Anybody in this field would tell you undoubtedly you want all the data. But there's something interesting with AT&T that never came out because it was never allowed in testimony, and that is sometimes AT&T, for a number of different reasons, must retain data longer than this 7-day limit. There are times when AT&T will tell you, hey, we keep this for 7 days, or we keep this for a year, we keep this for 7 years. But there's a number of things that happen at AT&T with different projects and different legal reasons that they are required to retain data longer. So if you don't ask, you don't know. And what's important is that both search warrants for Bryan Kohberger's phone clearly articulated they were requesting timing data. There's a fact sheet that's required to go to AT&T. And in the bottom of that fact sheet, there's a comment section. And somebody typed in that comment section, please send us the last 7 days of timing data. So, the idea that, well, it doesn't exist, we didn't ask for it, there's a clear paper trail that it was asked for repeatedly. And then when you look at, warrant returns are a thing. When you serve a search warrant, it's just not the end of the search warrant. You have to go back to the judge and say, hey, Your Honor, here's what we received. Here's the inventory that was produced as a result of that search warrant. And in that return, it actually states everything they asked for was received. So, as an investigator on a high profile case of this nature, if I had purposely and intentfully requested timing data on 2 different search warrants, sent a cover sheet within an email stating, give me the timing data, and it was never produced, I would make sure to note that in either my report or the return, that items that I am specifically requesting were not produced. And that would prevent, any argument now, but that wasn't done. So that's the timing issue.
Okay. And then another statement in your affidavit, just to clarify, you said, I've worked with AT&T Global Legal Demand Center for over 15 years. I have firsthand knowledge that AT&T GLDC is one way, but not the only way for law enforcement to obtain call.
Do these ladies work together in real life? What state? New York? Who are they? Custody queens off the clock? Custody queens air? 2485? Hold on. What's Custody Queens on air? Oh, it's the same channel. Okay, whatever.
Detail records from AT&T. Is that, what does that mean?
In short, to just make this really simple, and then I don't want to get too far in this rabbit hole because we can talk all day about how this happens. There are multiple entities within AT&T that produce records for different reasons. And I'm no way insinuating that it's not legal, that it's not compliant, and that it's not proper. With the proper legal authority, there's different methodologies to which you can obtain this data. GLDC is one.
All right, I'm skipping forward.
I've been involved in thousands of cases where a phone is being tracked in real time, and elements and resources are being used to find and keep eyes on that phone. Anybody in this industry who tells you timing advanced data is available, but they do not want it or they would not seek it out for that type of an operation, it is out of tune to what they're doing with this type of information. It is a common law enforcement practice that I would say arguably the overwhelming majority of law enforcement agencies in the United States use, to include the FBI. So the idea that a live tracking mission is occurring and we're not using the resources that we're asking for and requesting from the carrier without making an issue that we're not receiving that is very abnormal.
So you would agree it's either a gross deviation from standard practice or potentially withheld information that wasn't provided to the defense?
I think that is a very fair statement. And could it be one or two or both? Absolutely. But it is outside the normal operating.
Do you think in your expert opinion that any information was intentionally concealed from the defense?
Whew. Yes. And I think my report makes that really clear. Like I
highlighted quotes from you, Sai.
It's a
expert opinion that any information was intentionally concealed from the defense. Do you think in your expert opinion that any information was intentionally concealed from the defense?
Whew. Yes.
Okay, this guy's making some big claims. And these girls are smiling. He's saying there was shit left out from the defense. He asked a couple questions, Penn.
And I think my report makes that really clear.
Then why did you hesitate to say yes if your report made it clear?
Like I
highlighted quotes from you, Sai.
It's a good read, Sai.
Very good read. Very good report.
I think I've been very outspoken that there is no doubt information was omitted and very critical information. And I wanted to probably say this before, but now's as good as
Okay, so things were withheld from the defense, he's saying to these ladies.
I think to have a real conversation, and this is both with all four of you, or all three of you rather, and your audience, there's a handful of things as a group I think we all have to agree on to even have a real conversation about this case. And the first thing is, anybody who says, I will never believe that Bryan Kohberger could have committed this crime, that's great. That's your opinion. I respect your opinion. But we can't have a conversation if that's where you're starting this thing. You know, if you're never going to believe that, what are we even doing? You have your opinion, I have mine. We'll go separate ways. So number one, we all have to agree it is plausible, it is possible. The second thing is we all have to understand this investigation could be so faulty, could have so many issues in it that it could actually not support a conviction if it ever went to trial. Like, we have to understand that.
Wow, he sure didn't tell the Gonsalves that. Did he? He certainly didn't tell them that if it went to trial, the investigation could be so faulty that it would not support a conviction. Ugh.
So many issues in it that it could actually not support a conviction if it ever went to trial. Like, we have to understand that is a reality of this case. And the third and most important thing is we have to all agree that both of these things can exist. It's not one or the other, you know, and I'm not talking about innocence and guilt in trial. I'm saying it is very plausible that Bryan Kohberger committed this crime. And it is also very plausible that this investigation has so many errors in it that it is potentially corrupted from ever actually showing justice through a trial proceeding or through a jury.
Okay, he certainly did not paint that picture with the Gonsalves. He certainly did not.
But there would be a concern to sort of avoid the legal procedure that would be required that all of us hold near and dear to make sure that our liberty is where it needs to be and we have all of our constitutional rights to a fair trial. It would be fair to say that that's a paramount concern for anyone in the judicial system. Yeah, and Sam, I think you just hit something that is probably really important for your audience to understand. I'm going to look at this at two different things, and it's really important that we separate for just a second, and I will put it back together in a second, but let's separate this for a minute. If we don't look at the legal precedents and the legal requirements of how evidence is obtained, analyzed, used, demonstrated, visualized, all those good things, let's just say we're just simply looking at evidence that exists today. 10 out of 10 courts in the United States convict Bryan Kohberger. There is overwhelming evidence that Bryan Kohberger committed this crime. And anybody who's telling you something different is either cherry picking certain things, or creating conspiracies that don't exist, or they haven't seen all the evidence, which is most likely the
Okay, I'm glad he said that. I'm glad he said that.
Thing here. Now, when we add the legal issues of how you can obtain that evidence, the proper way to analyze that evidence, the proper interpretation of that evidence, now we get to kind of a 50-50 thing. I think there's probably 50% of the courts throughout the United States that would have suppressed a lot of evidence in this case, enough so that a conviction may never be obtained. And, you know, if anybody doubts me, they're like, that Cyree guy, he's crazy. He's a conspiracy theorist. If you don't believe me, all you have to do is simply Google Jeffrey Nye, Fox News. And Jeffrey Nye is one of the AG, the attorney generals in Idaho, who did all the oral arguments in court as it relates to the DNA evidence in this case. And if you listen to that interview, he'll tell you firsthand, everything was at stake on the DNA. If they lost the DNA, everything that comes behind it would have been gone. And he'll tell you that's a lot of evidence. That's all the cell phone records. It's all the Celebrite extracts. It's everything. And then he'll go on to tell you that they didn't even argue for some other exception to that rule, to the fruit of the poisonous tree, if you will, because it didn't exist. So, you know, you have a major player on the prosecution side who's telling you, when we went into court to argue that we felt the IGG would be upheld, the legal process in which we got it, we knew we were risking everything. And, you know, I think that's really important for people to understand, because I don't believe the IGG was done properly. I think that we have a lot of issues. I think technology has outpaced our ability to understand what's happening with evidence today. And the courts will catch up, but it'll probably take 10 or 15 years. But yeah, it's going to be real interesting how that works out.
And just to clarify real quick, when you said we were risking everything, you're talking about the prosecution when they were risking everything, right? You're not talking about you being part of that.
There was a decision made fairly early in this investigation to proceed with IGG, and then that decision was further predicated with knowingly conducting an IGG investigation outside of the recommended policies, if you will, of the Department of Justice. And that was not an accidental decision. It was an intentional decision that investigators at the time who made that decision felt that it was okay to step outside of policy because of the nature of this crime. And the way that they did it is, in my opinion, very problematic when we start looking at legal rights to how we manage this type of data. And I want to go on the record very clearly here. I think IGG is a very powerful tool that law enforcement should absolutely have the ability to use. But I also feel that we have to properly use it. There has to be a legal process. That legal process has to be transparent, and we have to have the public's trust that we're doing it properly. And when we make decisions to intentionally go outside of policy, conceal, hide, and omit the process that we did, I think that cuts to the rule of law completely, and everything that you guys probably see on a daily basis that you fight for, right? We have rules for a reason. And when we start to violate that, that's that slippery slope where we start losing other tools and the process itself becomes corrupt.
It seems to me that the use of the IGG was more a violation of the public's privacy rights or rights than necessarily of Bryan's, because it was searching public information. Is that maybe why the prosecution felt safe enough, at least in this prosecution, to go that route?
I don't want to speak on what the prosecution felt or didn't feel. I'll summarize how I feel. And, my opinion in $5 may get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So this is my opinion of looking at the laws, understanding how IGG works and how it was done in this case.
These
the
girls'
first thing,
faces.
and this is really important, they would have got to Bryan Kohberger without the IGG. That was
Okay, so there you go. So who cares? Why does it matter if it gets thrown out? Why are we stressing about if it's thrown out or not? They would have gotten to Bryan Kohberger without the IGG. But then on the other hand, he's saying if the IGG was thrown out, the case goes to shit.
It's already in motion when the FBI identified Bryan Kohberger to local law enforcement and the prosecutors because of the IGG results. Bryan Kohberger was a known investigative lead. They had his DNA from the knife sheath. All it would have taken is that match, right? So number one, I don't feel like IGG should have ever been done in this case. IGG is something you do at the end of a case when your case has gone cold and you've ran out all of your leads. And if you look at the DOJ interim policy, it states that very clearly in Section 5, before an agency takes on IGG, you're supposed to eliminate all investigative leads. Bryan Kohberger's name was in a report and was the most viable investigative lead in this case before the IGG results were done. So
Okay, bing bong. So there you go. He just said Bryan Kohberger's name was in a report and was the most viable investigative lead in this case before the IGG results were done.
before the IGG results were done. So I want to start this conversation with IGG wasn't required. That's not the only way to get to Bryan Kohberger in this case. And I think that's really important for the people to say, I'll never believe Bryan Kohberger did this case. He was already on the radar. And I think they would have got to him. And man, if they would have got to him that way, this entire case changes. I think it gets.
But if he's wrong on this, how is he not wrong on other things? Like, I mean, I firmly believe they knew who he was before that, too. I've always thought that. The FBI doesn't give away their shit. And I think there were things the FBI wasn't sharing with Moscow either. But how is he wrong?
Much cleaner. But the decision was made to go down IGG. The problem is when the IGG did not produce the initial results that they were hoping for, there was a decision made to go even further outside of those guardrails. And this is where Othram was told to stop work. The FBI took over. There's some things that happened with that sample. And in my opinion, this is where law enforcement needs to be held accountable. And I'm saying that as a law enforcement officer for 20 years and someone who's helped law enforcement for the last 15 years and currently today still working with law enforcement on cases. When we don't write search warrants and we go through back doors and we try to hide the way that we're doing things, there's a problem. And,
thanks, Doodle.
I just don't ever want to be in a position where I have to sit on the stand and explain to a jury why we wouldn't follow normal policies and procedures. And in this case, they knew that they couldn't. So they intentionally went through a back door that they knew there's a policy. You can't do that. And they did it anyway. The more important thing, and I think I'll push back just a little bit, Ron, is the public's privacy rights compared to Bryan Kohberger's. And I think this is a really important thing. When I say technology has outpaced our understanding of it within the rule of law, this is exactly one of the things that I'm discussing. When, let's say that we get your DNA or your DNA profile, and from your DNA profile, they get this SNP. It's an SMP profile. And then I take this SMP profile and I go out and I search for, relatives.
He's scrambling my brain too. And this is a long ass podcast, dude. All right, let's keep going. We'll try to tough through more of it.
There's a component here that is completely missed in this case. When I go search for SMP profiles, and Ron, for a second, I'm going to make you Uncle Ron. Okay, so we are now related. You have my DNA, and I left it at a crime scene, and I do not have an expectation of privacy to that DNA. It's fair game. I left it at the crime scene of a crime I committed. But when I go as a law enforcement officer and I take this SMP profile and I start loading it into public databases, I'm not searching for your DNA necessarily, Ron. I'm searching for DNA that we share. So the idea that Bryan Kohberger's DNA wasn't searched, it was family members, is completely inaccurate. They didn't have family members' DNA. They had Bryan Kohberger. And where I think people miss the connection here is that we share DNA. So the question doesn't become, is Ron's public expectations, of privacy violated here, are mine? Because the DNA that you and I share, should I have an expectation of privacy to our common DNA? We both share it. And if you look at any cases in the United States of standing, and when two people occupy the same space, the law is pretty clear on if search warrants should be used. And Ron, can you consent to searches for me? And the law is already really stated on those things. So, at the very least, I think that this is why search warrants are required. This is why they should have gone with a search warrant. And I think it was a critical error that they didn't.
So I definitely want to, a little later in this interview, get through why specifically you believe that Bryan Kohberger is guilty, but I do want to backtrack a little bit to the specific scope of your representation within this case. I watched your testimony May 30th of 2024, and I wanted to kind of talk you through that or ask you some questions about that, because I know part of your testimony talked about the 2 search warrants that happened on December 23rd of 2022.
Sure.
So with respect to the first search warrant, is it unusual for law enforcement to issue a search warrant, have enough time to analyze that search warrant, and then issue that second search warrant in the same day?
All right. So it depends on the situation. If this is a life or death circumstance where I can articulate if the delay in my action could potentially cause a death or severe injury, I would expect to see turnarounds like we see in this case. And I don't think there would be anything wrong with that, and it'd be perfectly normal. In a quadruple murder of this nature with limited evidence, and then this first search warrant kind of being the linchpin of my case, right? If this first search warrant falls, potentially everything that happens after the search warrant falls with it. I just don't see the need to rush. If anything, this is the time in the investigation to put the brakes on, to reassess, maybe get some fresh eyes on it. Let's look for those potential catastrophes that could happen at court, and let's make sure we're functioning in a very significant, solid way that we know we can uphold. And your question hits the main problem that I see with this case is in rushing. Why typically do we not like to rush? Because as all of us know, that in any line of work, when we rush, we're more prone to make mistakes. And in this case, there's no doubt that those 2 search warrants, well, mainly the second one, but the first one to some extent, were rushed. And there are critical errors in those search warrants that just are not accurate. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 slight ones. There's major inaccuracies in the search warrants.
If you were testifying as an expert, and this case actually went to trial, and you were going through those search warrants, could you prove that much of those allegations in the search warrants were actually false?
Absolutely. I feel very, very comfortable that in the event the defense or a defense team wanted to suppress the cell phone records, they would be successful in doing so. Trying to show that these search warrants would not stand up, or if the judge had the new information that we now know is true, it would have changed his or her opinion. It would be very easy to do. And the follow-on question is probably going to be, well, if that's the case, why didn't the defense do that in this case?
Okay. I'm skipping forward to 4251. We're talking about the PCA. Sorry. I'm eating crackers.
Can we talk a little bit about that 247 timeframe that was placed in the PCA? Because it sounds like that was wrong, that everyone knew it was wrong, that it's really 254, and that suspect vehicle 1 could not be suspect vehicle 1.
And yes, and when you say everybody's seen, there was finally a correction in June, July-ish of 2024, where it was admitted that that was wrong. But it's almost a year and a half later. There's no doubt.
That's inside. Do you recall what document that correction was made in?
It is a report from the FBI, and I do not know if that has been released yet or not. But it was admitted. And the only reason I'm saying this is that there is no doubt about this. There is no argument anymore. That's been put to bed. Everybody agrees this phone was powered off at 254.45, not 247. And that dramatically changes the entire narrative. If that phone stays on until 254.45, which it did, and it stays connected to AT&T's network, which it did, and we look at the connections during that 7 minutes and I think it's 45 seconds, the entire narrative changes. That vehicle is never on Highway 270. It's never eastbound on Highway 270. Everybody wants to talk about Floyd's and fog lights and all this other stuff. It's a silly conversation because there's no reason to talk about a white car eastbound on Highway 270 because there's no evidence of Bryan Kohberger traveling on Highway 270 during that time, as the narrative says. And I'm not saying he didn't travel east. I'm just saying there's no evidence that he ever traveled on Highway 270, and you're going to have a really hard time convincing me that because the physical evidence shows the absolute contrary of that statement.
And so that 254.45 is both verified by the AT&T records and the Celebrite forensic extraction. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's a real troubling thing, Sam, because one of the things we like to look for as investigators in a case is co-corroboration of evidence. If I have 2 different types of evidence that are saying the same thing, that's really important that I make the jury understand that. So very frequently when we're looking at a set of phone records from AT&T and the phone disconnects from the network at 2:54:45, and then I go look at the operating system logs from that phone and it says 2:54:45, I have two independent sources saying the same thing. And for me to say that that is a standard practice in investigations, I can't overstate that. So the fact that there's everything in the search warrants are relying on this 2:47 timeframe in order for the narrative to fit, yet we know the physical evidence shows 2:54:45 on the Celebrite, that's more than just inconvenient. That's a real conflict that someone needs to say, yeah, it never occurred.
What do these girls say about the surviving roommates? Do they think that they did something?
Occurred to me that maybe we should look at both pieces of evidence together.
What evidence did you guys see? Obviously, we haven't seen a lot of this. What evidence did you have that proved that it was 2:54?
Well, we have the actual time stamp on AT&T's records, and we have the actual timestamp in Celebrite.
Why does he keep laughing? He's very off-putting. I don't like this guy too much.
We have the actual time stamp on AT&T's records, and we have the actual timestamp in Celebrite's report. Like Celebrite will show an on and off log. AT&T will actually show when the phone, and I explain this in my report that's been released as well. So it's public information that's out there. I want to make it clear, I'm not saying somewhere around 2:54 we think it turned off. It's 2:54:45. Like I can tell you the second that phone was powered down because it's recorded on logs that are separate logs kept by two completely different entities, if you will, and they perfectly match. So why would we believe it wasn't 2:54:45?
And so that was a power off. That wasn't a lost connection or something else. The phone was actually powered down at that point, is what the evidence is showing.
When we look at just the AT&T records, we wouldn't be able to say that. We just can say that it disconnected from the network at 2:54:45. And there's a number of reasons that could have happened. When we look at the Celebrite, it does show a powering event. So the phone was physically shut down. Now, whether that was, I don't know how much of that has come out, and I'm not an expert in Celebrite, so I'm not going to go any further than that, other than it appears that it's a powering event in the Celebrite report.
Did Ann Taylor, did she agree that that was the time, the 2:54:45? Did she agree? Was she of that opinion as well, based on the information?
I don't believe that anybody in this investigation, prosecution or defense, doubts that today.
You mentioned before that there were some specific, I guess, errors or omissions that the FBI made that kind of snowballed or kind of led to the issues. What specific decisions or errors were those? Do you recall, or do you know?
Yeah, I think I made it really clear in my report, but we'll kind of condense that down into a very quick summary. AT&T records are very unique.
I think I made that clear in my report. He laughs again.
Report, but we'll kind of condense that down into a very quick summary. AT&T records are very unique. AT&T shows us handoffs. So if I'm sitting here talking to you guys, let's say I'm on my cell phone. Even though I'm stationary in one place, my phone is handing off between cell sites. If I'm driving, it's handing off along cell sites when I go. Some of the providers don't provide a very granular view of that, but AT&T is different in that it shows all of those connections. So, for example, in this case, from 2 a.m. to 2:54:45, Bryan Kohberger's phone is connected to the AT&T network. Every second of that time, we can account for which cell site, which sector it is using to maintain that connection. So the idea that we map 2 or 3 or maybe 4 cell sites and we say, oh, look, he's south or he's eastbound, when we eliminate 94, 95, maybe 97% of those other connections that tell a very different story, it's hard to say that that isn't a cherry picking or a intentional omission of data that tells a different story. I've been teaching this subject matter now for almost 20 years. You map all the data. You always map all the data. There is never a reason
skipping.
It's tough for me to say because you're asking me to kind of get into what somebody's mindset at the time was. When the initial omissions were made, I can't tell you if it was just pure sloppiness or it was intentional. 18 months later, when it's still not being corrected, it's intentional. So, I don't want to come out and say, oh, this was intentional, it was manipulated from the beginning, because none of us can say that. What we can say is that it should have been done in the beginning when it was made clear that it was missing and that it needed to be done. If you watched my testimony, you probably saw the very last thing that I said is I reserve my right to change my opinion when all of the data was mapped. And that wasn't, some happenstance statement that I made as a parting shot on the stand. If nothing else, it was kind of like, hey, there's more data out there and this story could change when that's mapped.
Okay. And then, so like in your report, when you're writing the conclusions and you say that it's justified to believe critical exculpatory evidence has been concealed by the investigators, what did you mean by that?
At the time that I was writing my report, it was clear that there was issues in this investigation with the timeline. And of a case of this magnitude, I would absolutely expect a third, fourth peer review being taken place at the very least, if not a complete deep dive by somebody else into this, and there's just no efforts. To this day, I have never been provided the complete mapping data for the phones that are pertinent. I'm not saying I haven't mapped it. I'm saying I've never received the entire map data from the state. And I think that's very telling, right? Why would you not do that?
Do you find that's intentional? That they're not turning it over or they're concealing it? Because if it's not normal, as an expert, do you find that intentional?
I would say that it's intentional, that there's definitely a decision being made not to do it. But I want to frame this correctly, where some people will probably immediately go, well, they're trying to hide it. The problem with this case is when you look at all the evidence, it changes and it doesn't get weaker. It gets really strong. So, I'm hesitant to say that it's intentional, because then you're going to have to convince me why law enforcement would intentionally not try to present the best evidence in this case. And I'm speaking firsthand about this, looking at the records. When you look at 6 months worth of data, which is how much data they obtained on Bryan Kohberger's phone,
he just got done saying that his report is public info. I can't find it anywhere. It's really clear in my report. It's public info, he said.
You look at that 6 months worth of data and you map it and you understand those daily patterns and that pattern of life, this case becomes incredibly strong against Bryan Kohberger. So, I think there's some sloppiness. I think there was over-reliance on DNA. And I also felt that there was probably this thought that there would never be somebody within the defense team capable of challenging the way that these reports came together and the narrative that was being presented. And to some extent, there was some truth to that.
Now,
Yeah,
there were
one of the
more-
worst investigations that you've ever seen in your career, correct?
On sloppy errors that were not, look, we all make mistakes. I guarantee you, I've had my fair share of mistakes on a crime scene. Any investigator who tells you they don't is just lying to you. So we've all made mistakes. So it's one thing to make a mistake. It's another thing that when you realize that mistake has been made, not making an attempt to clean it up, not trying to fix it, or doubling down and actually, sticking to that story despite overwhelming evidence. And that's where your bias starts to come in, that we can really start to see that there's an issue here.
I want to make sure I understand the different types of data and stuff that was received, because we've been talking about the cell tower connections. And I guess the benefit of that is a cell phone is always connected, as long as it's on, to a cell tower. And so you can have a pretty continuous picture of where it connected and where it was handed off. There's also, and you in your report, you talk about these historical precision location information reports, which I understand is proprietary with AT&T. But those are not always available, I guess. The phone has to be doing something for it, but AT&T can actually give, when it does ping, like it's part of that, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding. It'll give you latitude and longitude within a certain number of meters. Is that information, the historical, the HPLI, was that used by the prosecution and law enforcement?
So specifically with AT&T, the report you're
I have no idea what he just asked. I'm not going to lie. This shit's over my fucking head. I need a break from these people. Let's go back in time a little bit. Whoops. Damn it. Damn it. Remember this why? I forget what this was all about. I know it was supposed to be his alibi or whatever, but did this involve Cy Ray? Let's see. Early morning on several occasions. The phone data includes numerous photographs taken on several different late evenings and early mornings, including in November, depicting the night sky. Mr. Kohberger was out driving morning hours of November 13th, 2022, as he often did to hike and run and or see the moon and stars. He drove throughout the area south of Pullman, Washington, west of Moscow, including Wai Park. And this is where it gets creepy, and we introduce the next Kohberger game, so to speak. So we've all looked at Wai Park, so let me explain to you why I think Bryan Kohberger chose this location to be part of his case. Much thanks to Sirius Black for sending me this information. I believe Kohberger chose this location to be part of his case because of Joyce Margaret LePage. Joyce LePage, who was 21 at the time, was last seen on July 22nd, 1971, on the campus of Washington State University, where she was an undergrad. 9 months later, her skeletal remains were found wrapped in carpeting and military blankets, bound with rope, in a deep ravine south of Pullman, Washington. Multiple suspects, including Bundy, have never been cleared, according to investigators. Joyce was an athletic and intelligent student. Her decision to attend Washington State was not a surprise to the LePage family. But Joyce would not graduate. In fact, Joyce would never grow beyond the age of 21 years old. In the summer of 1971, the WSU junior disappeared without a trace. 9 months after her disappearance, her remains were found April 16th, 1972, in a gully roughly 10 to 15 miles south of Pullman, west of Colton, just off Wawawai Road in remote Wawawai Canyon. Her mostly skeletal remains were wrapped inside a military blanket and green carpet. The green carpet had gone missing roughly 10 days before she was reported missing from the university's Stevens Hall, which was under construction at the time she disappeared. Joyce was known to hang out on the first floor of the vacant dorm, where she would study, play piano, and relax from the stress of taking extra classes during the summer term. An extensive cold case file shows the Whitman County Sheriff's Office reported she was most likely killed when WSU police first investigated the missing carpet. Joyce was someone's daughter, sister, and friend. She was a person for the LePage family they mourned. There are still families who miss and love her. She was the second out of 5 children. Joyce was the second after her sister Phyllis. She had 3 younger brothers, Bruce, Stephen, and David. Joyce and her brothers and sisters grew up on the family farm on LaPorte Drive. As a child, Joyce would often pester her brothers and leave them scattered notes when they were too noisy or bothersome. The family reported her missing after she didn't come home for a weekend visit in Pasco. The Whitman County Sheriff's Office reported her remains were sent to the FBI for examination. The FBI discovered 7 possible knife markings on her ribs that they reported being the cause of death. However, after 9 months in a gully of Wawawai Canyon, animals and scavengers had consumed part of Joyce's decomposed remains. A unique set of hurdles have been placed for this case. She wasn't reported missing for 10 days, and DNA testing didn't really hit the scene for another 20 years. Most of the materials and resources are well over 50 years old, and that timeline factors into, between her going missing and her officially being declared a murder victim, a lot of information we need is missing. There have been numerous suspects and persons of interest throughout the years. However, any of those individuals would be well into their elderly age or have died. One person of interest, a convicted serial killer, in particular, died in '89. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders and was confirmed in 20. He was a person of interest in the disappearance of Joyce LePage and Lori Partridge of Spokane. Bundy, however, never confessed to Joyce's murder, and he denied responsibility for Joyce's death before his execution in 1989 in Florida's Old Sparky electric chair. We have to broaden the case out, said one of the investigators, and take all the possibilities. Ted Bundy is one of them. In the last few years, there's been a reward for anyone who can provide information that leads to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible. The reward is $100,000, $40,000 for information that leads to an arrest, with an additional $60,000 if that leads to a conviction. And this investigator said that he will remain involved and keep the reward up to $100,000 for as long as he is alive. And anyone with information on Joyce LePage's disappearance and homicide should contact the Whitman County Sheriff's Office at 509-397-6266. So this, my friends, is why I think Bryan Kohberger chose this location to be in his trial. And not. What do you guys think? I think he has played so many games. He chose the park as an alibi because he knows that route shows his car coming back. I don't know about that, does it? I mean, Ann Taylor's just being a defense attorney, right? I mean, what is she supposed to say? If there was a chance that he was slightly autistic, she would have to use that. I mean, the dude committed 4 murders. He ain't got much to work with here. He needs some sympathy, right? Let me see what you guys are saying. Cyree did imply during one of his interviews that Ann Taylor has an unhealthy relationship with Kohberger. Apparently she goes to see him all the time. She's the only one. Yeah, he did say that. Let's see if he talks about anything like that in this. I mean, okay, hang on. Here it gets good. Did you analyze only Bryan's records? Here we go. That was just a little palate cleanser. He did, KDP. I 100% agree.
Now, did you analyze only Brian's cell records?
No.
So you analyzed others as well?
Yeah, and in my report, so we can just keep this on the record, I outline all of the records that I actually analyzed. There's 6 months of records that were obtained on all 4 victims, as well as Mr. Kohberger. And another disturbing or another problem with this case is, to this day, I have never seen a mapping file produced by any investigator that shows all 5 of those devices on a map and their correlations over a 6-month period. We just don't see that. And I can tell you I've done it, and I've looked at it, and it does tell a story. There's things there. Some of that I'm still not at liberty to discuss. I would love to, but it's not out there yet. It hasn't been released, and some of that evidence hasn't been released yet.
Do you know why that evidence hasn't been released yet? I mean, we're over a year out. Do you know what the holdup or what the problem is there? Because it might eliminate some speculation from both sides.
I couldn't agree with you more. I have no problem with my investigative report being released the day the plea deal was signed. I can't explain why this thing has drug on as long as it has.
Okay, so it's not been released.
So in your report, you talk about the records that you review, and you reviewed and mapped Jack Showalter. Can you describe what you found, or is that something you're not at liberty to talk about at this point?
Showalter?
I will just put, there's no reason for me to believe that Jack Showalter has anything to do with this crime. Like, there's zero evidence.
Was he being surveilled? Was he under surveillance outside of Moscow that you're aware of? I know there's been information that
I can't with these ladies. I can't.
Has been brought out that him and another potential
Danny
person
Rolling.
of interest were being surveillanced.
I agree with that too, Body. 100%.
One of them might have had a cut on their arm that was untreated.
I've heard bits and pieces. I can't cite anything directly. I'm unaware of, the direct actions. There was a lot of investigative leads that were looked at in this case.
Who had a cut? Who had a cut that was untreated? What? Hold on.
Outside of Moscow that you're aware of? I know there's been information that has been brought out that him and another potential person of interest were being surveillanced. And one of them might have had a...
I think it's called surveilled, not surveillanced.
a cut on their arm that was untreated.
A cut on their arm that is untreated. A cut.
I've heard bits and pieces. I can't cite anything directly. I'm unaware of, the direct actions. There was a lot of investigative leads that were looked at in this case. I'm yet to see any that answer the questions that, as an investigator, I would be looking for as a viable suspect. And more frequently, when we look at DNA comparisons, I think we have to come back to the DNA.
Oh my God.
We can start to rule some people out as well.
Here we go.
Can you confirm that Bethany was at home on 11/13/2022 from midnight to the time that the 911 call was placed?
I don't know that I can get into that yet.
Why is she laughing? What is their deal, dude?
I will say this. The 2 surviving people in the house, I have no reason to believe that they're anything other than victims. And my personal opinion is any social media, podcast, news, reporters, or anybody else that tries to spin some type of conspiracy theory that these 2 girls somehow pulled off this quadruple murder just defies all common sense and logic. Like,
does he know that these girls think that it was them? Look at her. She's like, really? Really?
There is no reason to suspect these 2 as the murder. Now, you want to beat them up for a handful of other things and some very poor statements and some misinformation. I get it. But the idea that these 2 pulled off this giant conspiracy and were able to avoid any detection of actual committing this murder or physical evidence that would be there is absurd.
Well, we're not making any accusations here. But did you find, so you sort of brought up Dylan, did you find...
Oh my God, you sort of brought up Dylan. Let's talk about Dylan. Whoa. Her
different interviews, I know she did quite a few following the murders. Did you find them credible?
I think it's obvious that there's some credibility issues with everybody involved with the initial reporting of this case. And I think there's a number of things that can be attributed to that. I also think it's very consistent with very traumatized witness/victims that experience something like this. So, can I speak to their credibility? I can't. I can see why some people would question their credibility, but also the investigation that I'm looking at, the evidence that I've seen on this case does not rely on their credibility.
Boom, right there. The evidence in this case does not rely on those 2 girls' credibility. Whether they're credible or not, he's saying they had Kohberger. And people need to listen to that.
This case doesn't make or break because of something they said or didn't say or something that they did or didn't do.
So when you're looking at whether or not your ultimate opinion on this case and on Bryan, you're not really considering the eyewitness testimony potentially of Dylan.
Oh, absolutely, I am. I think it's difficult for us to dismiss it.
I think they're looking for confirmation from someone who was involved in the case body.
Because while it is vague and it did change over time, it doesn't necessarily describe somebody who doesn't look like Bryan Kohberger, right? It doesn't describe somebody that we could say, that's weird. This statement is in complete contradiction of what Bryan Kohberger looks like. The timing is also very, very important. There's things that happen in her statement and her text messages that also does provide her some corroboration to what she's reporting. So, I think she saw somebody 100%. I think that her description is more similar to Bryan Kohberger than it is contrary to Bryan Kohberger. And I think it's important that all of that happened before anybody knew about Bryan Kohberger. So, there is some things we have to consider could be credible there.
Well, what do you make about the fact that Dylan herself, if you assume that what she's saying is true, that she's repeatedly told investigators that she couldn't tell whether certain memories were real or dream related? She repeats this in many, many interviews. So her testimony, if we're to believe it, we would need to, I would assume, also give her some credence to her own admissions, which are that they may have been a dream.
100%. And I just find it very convenient that her dream was pretty accurate. So, I think that we have to look at this from two sides. Number one, we're dealing with somebody who is young. I think their life experience is very limited, and we know that person is impaired at the time. How they're manifesting how this thing worked out over time, I think we have to take that into consideration. The other thing that I think you cannot just dismiss is, what was this girl subjected to personally? What did the media say about her? What did social media say about her? Did she have some other reasons over time?
What are you ladies saying about her?
To start to distance herself from this case. And anybody who tells you she didn't just simply doesn't know what this poor kid went through, not only in the incident themselves, but was subjected to by the general public as a result. I mean, I've heard people on podcasts actually implicate her as one of the potential murderers.
Did these ladies do that? Did they have they straight up? I can't stand how I can see the lines in her freaking throat. That's so creepy. Her thorax. Have they straight up said it was Dylan? Because he's basically telling them, and this guy's just like, what? Did he know what kind of channel he was going on?
That's how far it's gone. So, is there maybe some other things at play here that a person in her shoes might start changing their story and say, I don't remember anything. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now you mentioned that that there's no facts that support that they were involved in actually committing the murders. But let's take a step back and let's look at any evidence that they were possibly involved in any of the preparation, the cleanup, or anything that else was surrounded by these murders. Because I'm reading.
Oh, he's gonna shut her down. He's gonna shut her down. Go Cy. Go Cy.
Anything that else was surrounded by these murders. Because I'm reading her transcripts. She sounds like the most not credible person I have ever dealt with in my legal career of 16 years old.
This lady is a fucking airhead. Oh my God. This I have ever dealt with in my legal career of 16 years old. Shut up, lady.
She sounds like the most not credible person I have ever dealt with in my legal career of 16 years old. 16 years. I'm not saying
you're already starting this conversation that there's cleanup. I'm very familiar with this case. I've walked through the house. I've seen all the crime scene photos. Nobody can show me a spot in that house where there's any evidence of cleanup.
Bing bong. Oh, they are not happy. They are not happy. Two non-blondes. Oh my God. Family lawyers.
And I know Dr. Turvey said that in his opinion, the lack of things in the bathroom is because of cleanup. That's not evidence of cleanup. That's his observation of a picture where he said, well, there isn't a towel hanging up. There isn't a bath mat. Therefore, somebody must have cleaned it up. Well, he didn't see that before this incident. He doesn't know what that bathroom looked like the day before or a week before. And this is a very bloody scene. And let me make something really clear. I've investigated a lot of cases. I was a blood spatter expert for a number of years. When people clean up bloody scenes, it is obvious. There isn't a, hey, maybe there's cleanup, maybe there isn't. Nobody in this case, nobody can produce you a photo showing you evidence of cleanup. So when we start the conversation about, well, what's Dylan's role in the cleanup? Where did we get cleanup?
I am so glad he put them on blast. You're starting a conversation of cleanup. Where did we get cleanup? Answer, ladies. Here we go. She's going to say, what do you make of the diluted blood?
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of the diluted blood?
I'm sorry?
What do you make of the diluted blood?
Diluted blood can happen for a number of reasons. So it could be, are we talking about sweat? Are we talking about, if we want to talk about the infamous beer pong table, we don't know what type of liquids may be there before. Could somebody have attempted to rinse off a knife or try to do something with a knife? That's possible. Diluted blood is incredibly common on a crime scene. It doesn't indicate anything specifically without more context. So, to me, that diluted blood is not evidence of cleanup. And when I think cleanup, I think of evidence of somebody physically trying to clean something up. And in this case, if that had happened as bloody as this scene was, there would be clear evidence of it. And I can tell you and all of your listeners right now, nobody is ever going to produce a crime scene photo that any credible, reputable expert in this type of evidence is going to say that is evidence of cleanup. And
there you go. Talking straight to the pro burgers. Their faces. They're like, okay, can we end this now?
even Dr. Turvey, if you listen carefully to what he said there was cleanup based on things not being present. But again, he doesn't have the knowledge to say that because he doesn't know those things were present before the crime. He doesn't know what was cleaned up. And I can ask you guys, did somebody recently move out of that house prior to the murders?
We know there was an empty room.
Possibly.
So maybe somebody took some stuff from the house and maybe some things got moved around the house. So without us being able to say what that house looked like the day before, we can't say that there's evidence of cleanup just simply because something isn't seen, like a bathroom.
Yeah, early on in the investigation reports, the ones we got fairly early on, it said by law enforcement that there was significant evidence of a cleanup.
No, there wasn't. No, there wasn't. Prove it, lady. Come on. Who said that?
I would again ask for putting in a report, there's significant evidence of cleanup, doesn't tell me anything. You know, that's not how we do an investigation. We put a marker down, we take a picture, we show a swirl mark, we show
She's pissed.
a rag, we show a P-trap that we took from a sink that actually has evidence. There is nothing that I have seen in this case that shows any evidence of cleanup inside of that house. And
what about the footprints? What about the lack of footprints?
Well, let's talk about the lack of footprints. No matter how this crime went down, no matter who the suspect was, let's take Bryan Kohberger out of the equation for a minute. If the theory is there would be footprints in the house, then there would be footprints in the house whether Bryan Kohberger committed this murder or not. The lack of footprints is not surprising to me. In fact, working a lot of very bloody crime scenes, it's not surprising at all. If my feet are in contact with the floor while blood is in flight, it would be very conceivable that there's no blood on the bottom of my shoes. This is super common. In fact, one thing that your trained and blood spatter expert is if I have 5 people and 4 of them have bloody feet and 1 of them doesn't, and they were all in the same area at the same time, I can tell you which one was standing and maybe which ones weren't standing because, you know, blood doesn't go on my feet when I'm standing. There is a bloody footprint. There's an issue with that footprint as far as, you know, whose it is and where it came from and when it was potentially deposited there. But more importantly, let's say that I have a bloody shoe tread and I step on carpet and I step on wood or I step on any type of flooring and then I clean that up. There would be evidence of cleanup, right? I would be able to see a swirl mark and maybe I don't see a footprint anymore, but I see the swirl mark of where that cleanup happened. And in this case, that simply does not exist.
So do you believe...
Here's an issue I've had with this because I know that the 2 scenes, the 2 bedrooms where it appears the murders occurred, Xana's room and Maddie's room, there is a lot of blood reported, and I think we've seen photos on the floors in there, and there are swirls of blood. There's blood, for instance, on the bottom of Xana's feet, indicating that there was some sort of a struggle, that at least she was stepping in blood in her room.
No shit.
So there was a lot of blood in those rooms, but then none in between those rooms and from those rooms to any entrance. That troubles me a bit with regard to how, you know, what.
So how does that prove that Bryan didn't do it, though? If there's no footprints, that means there's no footprints from anybody. It doesn't matter who did it. Whoever did it didn't leave any footprints.
Happened after, or was there something? Because you would think with the amount of blood that was on the floor, and there are some clear marks indicating somebody moved, and we know Xana did. How is it that whoever did this, if it is Bryan or if it is somebody else, escaped any trace of blood between those rooms or between either of those rooms and the exits?
It's actually very common. And you know, there's something that we have to discuss here for just a second. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of blood on the floor. If I step in that blood and then I walk through the house and I leave a bloody trail, you're going to see where I first stepped in the blood. That's going to be obvious. And if somebody tries to clean up or manipulate that area, it's going to be very obvious. In this case, we don't see that. In order for somebody to have bloody shoes, they have to step in blood, or blood has to get deposited on the bottom of their shoes. If they're stepping in blood, we would see that in the areas where there is blood deposited on the floor, and we don't. The crime scene photos don't show that. There is no reason in this case to believe that the evidence, the bottom of the suspect's shoes, whoever the suspect might be, the bottom of those shoes would be covered in blood to leave a trail. There's nothing to indicate that in either one of the bedrooms. Now, is there potentially
their chat is on fire? Oh my God, I'm glad you mentioned that. You guys, their chat is pissed. Their chat is so mad. They're like, hello, what about this? What about that? Look. Hold on, let me put it on live chat. They're so mad.
very small, invisible blood that was transferred through the house on the path, whoever the suspect was? Sure. I can't speak to the ability and the...
Because he sounds like Dylan, because they cleaned for 8 hours. Did you not see Xana's floor? Diluted blood? So Xana fought herself? Shut the fuck up. Gray Hughes 2.0.
The amount of effort that was put into looking for that in a way that would produce all of it. But again, this is one of those rabbit holes we can get in and we can go way down. Whether Bryan Kohberger committed this crime or not, those facts are the facts. You insert any other suspect in this place, that issue still remains. And that's what I'm saying. It's very common. It doesn't surprise me at all.
So if we take for a second the footprint issue and put it to the side, if you look at the fact that, what do you make of the fact that there's no blood transfer from the two rooms? So the knife presumably and the murder weapon or weapons presumably is covered in blood. So why isn't that transferred?
I don't agree with you that there wasn't blood transfer. And I'm not going to get into a bunch of detail with that because I don't know what has all been released on that. I don't keep up with the document dumps. I just don't agree. There's blood transfer.
Can you?
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, so I know it's pretty clear that you don't believe that there was a cleanup, but you can't exclude that there was either. So by the same sort of rationale, if you don't see any evidence of it because the absence of evidence isn't evidence of a cleanup, you can't also exclude the fact that there was a cleanup.
I think we should probably define cleanup. If you're telling me that somebody took time to clean up the crime scene itself, somehow remove physical evidence that was critical in this case,
dude, their chat is hating him. Look at Sai. How much did you get paid to put false narrative out?
Blood evidence. I haven't seen any evidence of a cleanup. If your definition of cleanup is somebody took a couple of items out of the house before law enforcement got there, I can't speak to that. And nobody else can because there's a lot of different people in that house, some of them by themselves at times. I don't know. But I haven't seen anything in this case that would indicate that there was an effort to clean up the crime scene itself.
Mm-hmm. Now, with respect to the bathroom that was on the one that we're referring to, I think Dr. Turby talks a lot about this in his report. Nothing in the bathroom, to my understanding, was ever tested. Is that your understanding?
I don't know that there's anything in the bathroom that could be tested. I mean, we have to collect something to test something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, there was a missing crock. There was one white crock that was found outside of the bathroom, and it was noted in a bunch of the reports.
So she's saying there's a missing crock? Dude, they are so desperate to blame the roommates.
That the other one wasn't found. But is that significant that that bathroom wasn't tested?
Not to me. It's not. I mean, we have to overlook so much other really critical key evidence to say that a crock that may or may not have contained some type of biological evidence on it could change this entire case. It could complicate this case, and it could definitely open the door to some other questions. But, all of those factors do not change the evidence against Bryan Kohberger. It just muddies the water to, hey, is there other things?
They don't want to
hear it. Here's the other thing.
it.
Can people have blood on items that aren't related to a particular crime scene inside of a house? And the answer is, of course we can. So, a crock that may or may not have had blood that somehow disappears, and I can't speak to all that, and I think I've been very clear on my idea of whether this crime scene was sloppy or not sloppy, or as far as the investigation itself being sloppy. I can't speak to that. But a crock does not change this case. Cleanup of a downstairs bedroom or bathroom does not change.
A crock does not change this case.
A crock does not change this case.
Look at Ron. He's like, what do you mean? I thought that crock was the smoking gun. They all thought Cy-Ray was coming to support. Well, I would have too. Based on prior knowledge. That is funny as shit.
As far as the investigation itself being sloppy, I can't speak to that. But a crock does not change this case. cleanup of a downstairs bedroom or bathroom does not change this case. There is still overwhelming evidence pointing to a suspect in this case, regardless of what we find with those things.
Now, with those words, overwhelming evidence, totality of circumstance, can you give us your top 5 pieces of evidence that you believe actually prove without a doubt that BK committed this crime? And do you think he did it alone?
I don't know what's been publicly released and what hasn't been publicly released. Motive, opportunity, the ability, pattern of life, events of that evening, video surveillance, all provides a pretty clear picture that Bryan Kohberger is an excellent candidate of somebody who could have committed this crime. And like I said before, I'm not going to talk about the admissibility of that evidence because I do believe that there's issues with the admissibility of all of that evidence. 10 out of 10 juries in the United States would convict Bryan Kohberger for this case if all of that evidence was allowed to be presented to that jury. And that's a legal thing that would have to happen in the court. And I've been very clear about, I do not believe law enforcement acted appropriately in the way that some of this evidence was secured. And I think that we need to hold some accountability there. And I've been very outspoken about that to my own detriment. Like, I don't have a dog in this fight. And this case has, been more of a detriment to me than it's been helpful to me by a long shot. So I'm not making this argument because I think, I want to show the world that I'm right. That's not what we're
Oh my God, totally. These would be people that Bryan Kohberger would hate. He would hate them. They're exactly the type of people he hated. Despised. Jules is communicating with Kohberger's sister. Oh my God. Say no more. What a loser. That girl's a loser, Jules. Why would you do that? Oh my God. What's your end goal, Jules? Clicks and views? Content? What is it? Jeez. Ron.
We're talking about. The evidence in this case is clear. I've been in a lot of jury trials. When I say 10 out of 10 juries convict Bryan Kohberger, if all of this evidence comes in, that's based on 30 years of experience of seeing these cases. And I think the three of you, if you are ever allowed to see all of the evidence in this case, would have a really hard time defending him. And you would agree, like, man, I've got an issue. Now, if you want to talk about legal issues and your ability as attorneys to potentially get some of this evidence out, that's a whole other conversation. And I think you have a great case. But if all that evidence comes in, you might be seeking a plea deal. I'll just put it that way. And we should talk about this. The defense team had lost almost every single motion they had filed, almost every single one of them. This was going to be an overwhelming case for the defense to overcome in trial. Overwhelming.
Guys, their chat are like a bunch of toddlers. Yeah, she hates me. Jules hates Jay for Justice. She sure does. And I wear that badge proudly. I wear it proudly.
Now, we get into the legal issue. This is also a case that the prosecution would have a really hard time explaining some of the processes that they did. So both sides are having issues with how this case could play out.
So circling back a little bit to, you've mentioned that there's overwhelming evidence, and it sounds like some of that evidence, unfortunately, is not available to the public. And so at this point, we can't really evaluate it on the same level that you can evaluate it on because we're not privy to that. But talking about the evidence that is widely available right now, is there any evidence within the scope of your expertise in this role, like the mapping data, the AT&T records, et cetera, that you've seen and reviewed that would provide you with a different explanation of the story associated with Bryan and what happened that night?
Yeah, so a really good way to summarize at a very high level is Bryan's activities that night leading up to the time of the murder is very suspicious. So let's just go down the conspiracy road. Maybe this is a better way for me to do it. For me to frame Bryan Kohberger for this case, here's what I got to do. I've got to start this framing in March of 2021. And I want that date to be really clear for everybody who's listening to this. I'm going to start framing, of all people in the world, Bryan Kohberger for this murder in March of 2021, because I'm going to make sure that there's a paper trail of him obtaining the murder weapon, or what could potentially be the murder weapon. So 9 months almost before the murder, I'm going to start this planning. Take in mind, I don't even know he's going to be in Pullman or Moscow in March.
Oh, shit. My bad.
Evidence that is consistent with what I would expect to see in the event that he did. Now, I think I make it very clear in my report that you just read where I'm at with that. It requires some explanation. this conversation. And that's all I'm trying to say to you guys. That's all I'm trying to say to your listeners is it's very easy for us to get in my head, Bryan Kohberger isn't guilty, and I'm going to just latch onto anything I can find that confirms that bias that I have. Opposed to, hey, the fact of the matter is there is a significant amount of evidence that indicates Bryan Kohberger committed this murder. The way that law enforcement processed this case, the way that it was handled, decisions that were made by prosecutors and federal agents down to the local agent is very troubling. There is a lot of procedural issues that I feel this case could still come back. I don't know that we're done with this case. I think there will be a second bite at the apple. And, you want to talk about a miscarriage of justice. Let's just say for a second, I know there's people listening that can never wrap their head around this, but let's say for a second, Bryan Kohberger truly is the actual suspect. Mm-hmm. The idea that he could walk because of the sloppiness and these critical errors that were made by law enforcement should infuriate everybody. Miscarriage of justice isn't just always convicting the wrong person. It's the idea that the right person walks. And if that doesn't bother you, that's a whole other issue.
That's something that's brought up a lot when you talk about when law enforcement conducts an investigation that violates, some of the constitutional limitations and so forth. Those instances probably far more often result in guilty people being free, avoiding the consequences because of the mistakes made by law enforcement that may violate the rights of people. About? And that's something I've had to have discussions.
Shut up.
Oh, absolutely. So from your perspective, you probably
get
would
to the
in
point.
Private with these cops who have not gone by the book and don't want to seem to skirt around the constitutional issues. I would expect you're pretty harsh on them in private because it might let somebody go free who committed a crime.
I'm pretty harsh on them in public. So yeah, in private I am too. And I want to make something clear. Yeah, I did release a book. I published a book, but I'll make it really clear. This book is not a tell-all to Bryan Kohberger. This book is not something most of your listeners would probably enjoy reading. The book is a methodology. It's an investigative methodology written for law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys on how big cases, we're talking about 68 terabytes in this case, how digital evidence needs to be properly managed, how it needs to be legal. It's not about Bryan Kohberger. I just use Bryan Kohberger in the book as an example of what happens when that isn't done, because it's not just a good example, it's the example.
Okay, so they misunderstood his message. His message isn't just about excuse me, it's not just about Bryan Kohberger. His message is overall, right?
Example of what a really screwed up investigation looks like when we don't account for the proper.
And these two thought it was going to help the narrative that they push.
Identification analysis of a lot of critical evidence. And this case is a perfect thing. So I get where your listeners are coming from. I think I've made it very public and private of how I feel about the investigation itself here.
Yeah. I want something. I'm sorry. Did either of you have?
No, go ahead.
I want to go back because we moved past something. I want to go to something that does go more to your expertise of the cell phone data. And
back
as
to
we
Dylan.
were talking about Dylan earlier,
Jesus
because
Christ.
the story that we're given about Dylan and Bethany is that after they saw the perpetrator at sometime between 4:30, they went to sleep and were essentially in the room asleep until shortly before the 911 call was made. It seems, and I know in Chris Whitcomb's book, there was I saw a timeline that included, it was portions of the prosecution's timeline that included some information indicating that Dylan's phone, at least, I don't know if it's a phone or Apple Watch or something, but some device of Dylan's moved multiple times in the house during those 8 hours or so, and that she also was actually on her phone doing a number of things. Did you see that evidence?
So lots of things to break down there. Number one, I'm not aware of both of those girls seeing a suspect that night. I believe only one of them physically saw somebody. Both of them also did report hearing something, right? So the reporting is consistent from both of them on hearing something that's happening, which obviously at this point we know is a murder. There is no doubt in this case that there was movement of one of these girls. And not only is there no doubt of the movement, there's no doubt of communications that occurred before that movement happened. And I've got no reason to question why it was done, where she went, and why she went there. It's very clear. And when we start talking about ways that you can corroborate people's statements, or you can actually lend a little bit more credibility, again, we're going to have to get into this conspiracy on top of everything else that is made up to frame. And why are we framing Bryan Kohberger of all people? But let's just assume we're still framing this conspiracy where we're going to stick this on Bryan Kohberger.
Right.
The text messages that are sent between the two surviving victims in that house, and the timing of those text messages, the content of those text messages, you have to put both of them clearly framed as part of this conspiracy. So now on top of all these other things you've been able to pull off to frame Bryan Kohberger, you now have to get them 100% involved in the giant conspiracy and then completely change their pattern of life when the crime happens. Some of the text message, and I'm not going to go into details because I don't know what's been released, I don't know what isn't, and I refuse to stay caught up on this case of what the data dumps are happening when. My personal experience are the content of those text messages are two girls who are absolutely terrified for their life at that moment. Do they make terrible decisions afterwards? 100%. Should we question those decisions? We should, because they are terrible decisions. But do I have any reason to believe that they faked it and that they intentionally sent text messages back and forth with certain content just to make it look like, the part of this conspiracy? I think that's a stretch for any logical person to make. But yes, there is.
But I think it's more than text messages between, because I know there were text messages. There was actually phone activity that I saw on that where Dylan was, and I think it was Dylan, was.
This guy's voice it's like sandpaper on my brain. How about with you guys? His voice is it literally is like gritty sandpaper. They just keep trying to get it out of him.
Activity that I saw on that where Dylan was, and I think it was Dylan, was on various websites, including things like Indeed.com and job search stuff during the hours between 4 and.
I would caution anybody to judge any phone activity from the time the murders happened until the time 911 call is made until you're physically seeing that evidence. I think you'll be surprised that what you're describing is probably not the case. And let me remind you all of something really quick. The Karen Reed case, there was kind of a mockery that happened in that case because everybody was convinced that a person involved in that case searched how long does it take to die in the snow at 2:30 something in the morning. And when the facts of the evidence actually came out in court, it was very clear that search happened at 6:30 in the morning. So I would caution people who are not trained, and just because I have a YouTube, and I promise you guys, I'm not talking about the three of you right now, but just because I have a true crime podcast, that doesn't make me an expert in forensic digital evidence. So when I start hearing things like that, and we start seeing things being circulated around, I would caution everybody from making any statements about what those two girls were doing on their phones until they see the physical evidence, and more importantly, they understand what that evidence means. Because we saw it on a national stage with Karen Reed. Some very smart people made what that evidence means. Because we saw it on a national stage with Karen Reed.
What was that noise when she moved?
Evidence, and more importantly, they understand what that evidence means. Because we saw it on a national stage with Karen.
Did you guys hear that? There was like a bass sound when she moved. I can't stand these. These people are pissing me off.
So they see the physical evidence, and more importantly, they understand what that evidence means. Because we saw it on a national stage with Karen Reed. Some very smart people made a critical mistake that made that search history 4 hours different than it was reported.
What physical evidence have you seen that would help us wrap our head around what you're saying right now? Because the evidence that we're seeing is different.
The physical evidence that I feel very comfortable with is the text message content, who they're calling at a critical time, who's answering and who's not answering. And then
are you referring up to the murders or following the murders or right around the time?
Right around the time of the murders. I'm going to say right after the murders because it's very consistent. If you read the text messages, it's very clear. And, and I will push back. I heard it on a previous guest that you guys had that, we don't really know when these crimes happened. And that is absolute nonsense. That is a statement from somebody or somebody who's trying to either weave a story or just doesn't understand the evidence. This is a case where at 4 a.m., there's actually a lot of activity going on in that house. And we can look at history. And this is where pattern of life is so important. And I hope people are understanding when I start talking about pattern of life, why it's so important. We can see what normal behavioral patterns look like for everybody involved in this case. And then we can see some things happening that you can't ignore. You can't ignore the white car driving by the house 3 times and then speeding away. We can't ignore hearing a dog bark. We can't ignore hearing certain things or seeing certain text messages. Like there's clear.
Look at this person. I don't play Islay. Has he been threatened by Jesse James Bailey's gang? Oh my God, touch grass.
Something happens right around a few minute time period, and we see a dramatic change in pattern of life on all of the devices, all 4 of them. So, for us to sit here and say, well, we really don't know when the crime is. It could have been the next morning. It could have been as early as 1:30. That's absolute nonsense. That's somebody who's crafting a story that just doesn't match the evidence.
Can you describe what some of those pattern of life changes were?
Somebody looking or accessing things they normally access right up to a very specific time frame, and then that phone never being used again. Matching text message content of somebody saying, oh my God, what's happening here, to that effect. There's clearly a change where a lot of activity stops on 4 phones and there's an absolute panic on the other 2 phones. That's probably the best way that I can frame it.
And are you talking about text messages? Is that what you're referring to?
I'm talking about phone use entirely, whether you're browsing, you're doom scrolling or death scrolling through something, whether you're receiving food, whether you're eating food. There is a lot of evidence in this case of when this crime occurred.
Do you think, sorry, hold on, Sam, I just have one more. Do you think it was normal for Dylan and Bethany to wait 8 hours to contact the police based on
Normal?
anything that they had on their phones?
Oh my God, he's laughing at this chick now. Oh, I bet she's getting pissed. Wow.
They need to wait 8 hours to contact the police based on
normal
anything that they had on their phones, their behavior. Is there anything that would help justify why 8 hours was waited before they called law enforcement?
I think it was a terrible decision.
Because I can tell you, that's one of the things that the three of us got into this case. A friend of mine had a channel. I watched it. I listened to it. And I don't think any of us could get logically past how anybody in college, drunk, not drunk, wearing blurry goggles, watching a show. I don't know realistically how somebody waits 8 hours to call 911.
And obviously I cannot explain to you why that may or may not occur and why they did or did not do the things that they may have done during that time period. I have no explanation for you. For me to say that that's evidence of them committing this crime, those two totally different things.
Agreed.
Do you think there's any flexibility with the time frame of when the crime was actually committed? Because isn't there some evidence out there that Ethan picked up a Snapchat call at 4:24 a.m. after he was apparently deceased?
Again, I would encourage everybody on the timeline when it comes to device activity to make sure that they have the full data sets and they understand how these individual systems report and capture time. Mm-hmm. I do not believe any of the 4 devices were actively used after the proposed time frame of these murders. I think there's overwhelming evidence that supports, for lack of a better term, let's just say roughly a 15-minute. And I'm not saying it's 15 minutes. I'm saying roughly a 15-minute period. I think there is overwhelming evidence that that's when this crime was committed. And anybody who's telling you, oh, no, it could have been here, it could have been there, they have to eliminate so much other things that are happening at that time frame. It just doesn't make sense.
And does having the crime end at that particular time, is part of that because it lines up with the car that's leaving? And so if that car that was leaving wasn't the person that actually committed the crime, that maybe there's some flexibility with when that crime occurred?
Well, again, the totality. We see that car pass the house multiple times. We see it try to park in front of the house. We then see that car pass the house in a manner that it's going down a dead-end road. And the only way for that car to come back out of that neighborhood is past the camera.
Exactly.
And all of this activity that is indicative of something happening inside the house is between the last time we see the car going down that dead-end road that potentially parked somewhere down that road to the time that car is leaving. And we also see a dramatic difference in what that car is doing. The first 3 times, it's slow travel. Somebody's trying to park. They do a very poor job of parallel parking. They do a 3-point turn in an intersection. There's no exigency. There's no reason to hurry. Mm-hmm. After this time period, we see what appears to be that same white car flee the neighborhood at a high rate of speed. We can actually hear the wheels squealing as it goes around corners. Again, we can sit here and create conspiracy theories, but the bigger conspiracy theory is, what if law enforcement never looked at a white car, right? That's the bigger conspiracy theory. They looked at a white car. What did they find? Well, evidence before they knew Bryan Kohberger or the fact that Bryan Kohberger owned a Hyundai Elantra, they came up with this is a Hyundai Elantra, and that's another piece that I think people will have a hard time explaining. And I don't even want to get in the conversation of fog lights right now. Law enforcement knew that the vehicle that drove by the house that night around this critical time period that fled at a high rate of speed right after we believe somebody inside saw a suspect who potentially committed these crimes matches Bryan Kohberger's vehicle perfectly.
Damn, he didn't even take a breath on that one.
The point that they actually put in reports and a bolo, hey, we're looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. That's a really hard thing to get over.
None of these people are happy about this.
My question is that where you're getting that's the time the crime ended, is because you're lining it up with that piece of evidence solely being that car?
I'm lining up that we are fortunate in today's world to have a lot of video cameras around. And when we take the video camera evidence and we look at what we see over the course of that night, and then we take text message activity, and we take food delivery, and we take when people are coming home, and we take statements about when people heard different things inside of the house, and then we take audio clips that were captured from outside of the house, and we look at, let's just say, a 12-hour period of when this crime could occur. This is really important. All of those things come together at a 15-minute window, all of them. And it's really hard for me to look at that evidence as an investigator and logically say, this isn't the time, right? And we also have a independent third party with nothing to gain, nothing to lose, who actually makes contact with one of the residents of this house minutes before this whole thing goes down. And there's no reason to believe anything has happened inside of the house at that time. So we get very fortunate with another piece of evidence that actually says, hey, around 4 a.m., everything's probably all right inside of that house. So yeah, I want to be really clear. Again, it's the totality. It's when you stack all these things on top and then say, well, it's not around that 15-minute window shortly after 4 a.m. You have to ignore an overwhelming amount of evidence to make that statement.
Okay, we're going to get to Molly McMichaels. I don't want to lose my train of thought, but we're going to get to her because her credibility is a little sketchy.
Oh my God. Now we're going to go to the DoorDash. Wow. Thank you for gifting 5, Irony. Welcome in, new members. If you received a membership, make sure you thank Irony. Her credibility is a little sketchy. So is yours, lady. So is yours.
But it sounds like everything you're just describing right now is all circumstantial evidence. We cannot affirmatively put him in the house, right? We cannot affirmatively put him in that car. We cannot affirmatively, absolutely, beyond a reasonable doubt, say that was his car. And there are a lot of issues with that car that I think are worthy of conversation and investigation. The problem is, you keep saying that there's this overwhelming evidence, and I do believe that there is, but we haven't seen it. And what we have seen has been altered, redacted, and then we have your report that's saying this is so not an error, this was intentional. And it's like, how are we supposed to trust anything they've done in this investigation? Because it's been the worst investigation in your entire 30-year career. So everything that I'm hearing is all circumstantial.
And there's a reason that I made the conscious decision to be a defense expert in this case, having never done that before in my career. And it's because, Kristen, you're hitting it right on the head.
Did you see her cup?
Having never done
These chicks are too much, man. She's too much.
that before in my career. And it's because, Kristen, you're hitting it right on the head. When we, and I'm saying we as law enforcement, when we as law enforcement investigators make the errors that were made in this case, we have completely corrupted the public trust that is necessary and required to act.
So he's going back to the problem as a whole, his manual for law enforcement, and I think that's the timing why he came out with this was because his book just came out. I think these girls were hoping for something he ain't going to produce.
Actually be effective at enforcing the laws, being effective in the criminal justice system. Like we've ruined that credibility. And this is why I've been so outspoken on this issue is I want to make it really clear. You're right. And if this case was done properly, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If things were followed up on properly, if things were investigated properly, we wouldn't be having this conversation because that overwhelming evidence would be known, because I suspect there would have been a trial. We wouldn't.
Has anyone ever seen their names on actual court documents? I don't know. I need to see some proof.
Be questioning the way that some of this evidence was obtained and the manner that some of it was concealed, right? So you're 100% right, but that doesn't change the fact that Bryan Kohberger is still our best candidate for this crime. And I do believe a proper investigation would overwhelmingly show that. I wish I could put a PowerPoint together and walk you through from the very beginning to the end, because I think it would dramatically change. You would not want him as a client, I'll just put.
Excellent candidate. I think the other one might have been, or most likely candidate. One of the issues that we have talked about, the three of us with this case, is that, and I think we can get into this with the 2 identified phone numbers on the cell data side, but was there really any follow-up or investigation regarding alternate perpetrators or other people? Because there's a lot of suspicious activity that doesn't even look like it was followed up on, kind of like the testing in the house. We kind of decided to test some stuff and not others, unless we haven't seen it. But an excellent candidate is not beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's just kind of where we as lawyers, how much was done to follow up any possible alternate theories?
Yeah, and some of this I can't talk about, but I can tell you this. If I felt that there was another potential, and I'm not talking excellent, if I had come across another potential candidate that I feel very likely could have committed this crime, I would not be quiet about it. It wouldn't be some secret that I put in my back pocket. I think I've made it very clear that when I see something that I agree with or don't agree with, I am vocal about it. I document it. I capture it. There's a lot of follow-up that was done. Some of it was done very well. Some of it was not done well. I've been very clear about that. I haven't seen anything that would suggest there's another perpetrator in this case. I'm not saying it's not outside the realm of possibility. And unfortunately, because of the nature of the investigation, some of that we may never know.
Is it fair to say that you've had access to all of the information and discovery regarding the different areas of this case? Because I know there were multiple experts. Is it fair to say for you to say that maybe the follow-up wasn't done the way you have done it, but did you have access to all of the evidence that, say, Ann Taylor had access to?
I can't speak to that because I don't know. I only had the evidence that I was provided. I don't have a master sheet of everything that was seized, to everything that was provided in discovery, to everything that was given to me.
What? Now, I know you have a background in crime scene investigation and a very good one. How much were you involved in the defense's strategy and evaluation of the crime scene investigation and other things beyond the cell data?
You know, with the crime scene itself, a crime scene, and, you know, I think people who have never worked in a crime scene like this, and I have, there was a statement by one of your guest speakers the other day that, you know, nobody else on this case had ever worked a mass homicide and nobody's ever worked a K-bar related murder. And that's just absolute nonsense. I can tell you right now,
What?
you cannot support that in any way, shape, or form. Anybody who has not physically processed a crime scene like this, you know, it's very easy for us to get in this headspace that we watch or we read and hear all these things and we're like, oh, how could they possibly do that? That's just not how it works in a crime scene. We don't know what we're looking for when we go into a crime scene. We could discover everything. We can discover nothing. So it's very fluid. Mistakes will always be made. I will argue there will never be a perfect crime scene processing case. There won't. There's always mistakes made. And that's no lack of training. It's no lack of
I mean, if you go to any case, I'm sure you can find mistakes and things like this. I don't know.
experience. It's a very difficult thing to process, and it's very easy to make minor mistakes that grow into.
I feel like he has a bigger goal here, and we want to know about Idaho, but he has a larger goal of educating law enforcement with his method, if you will, of how to handle digital evidence. I mean, there's definitely an end goal for him. It's not just because it was weighing on his mind. Okay, so I'm going to skip a little more because he goes on and on and on. All right, let's go. This is Molly McDaniels. Here we go.
We know Molly McDaniels because that one was provided. We don't know the other one because we don't know what the other device was at this time. It could have been a car. There's a lot of things it could have been. So it doesn't necessarily mean that's a person walking around is where I'm headed with that.
Okay, wait, hold on.
How do you identify?
I'm not going to disagree with anybody on that, but I think it's important that we realize.
When you talk about, sorry, I'm going to swerve left, the Google geofence, I know that they were, I think it was mentioned in Tom Slavinsky's report where he says that Mallory states on November 20th, Google was asked for 2 identifiers. And it sounds like of the 2, we can identify that Molly McMichaels was one of them by the last 4 of her cell phone. But who was the other?
What's November 20th? What is she talking about?
November 20th, Google was asked
Oh, they put the warrant in on November 20th? Sorry.
for 2 identifiers. And it sounds like of the 2, we can identify that Molly McMichaels was one of them by the last 4 of her cell phone. But who was the other identifier?
I do not know. I can't tell you that. And it's not that I can't tell you because I can't tell you. It's because I don't know.
And do you know, or are you familiar at all with the procedure that would have gone into determining who those 2 identifiers were going to be?
Night, Leo.
I'm intimately familiar with that process. And there's something that for you and your listeners that need to take this into consideration. Those devices may not be cell phones. And that's what a lot of people make a mistake of when they're looking at a case like this. There are devices in your house, potentially appliances, that could potentially have some type of cellular activity that would result in looking like a device in the area. A lot of our vehicles are now equipped with that. So the idea that there's 2 phones that the Google geofence produced, that in of itself is a faulty statement. We know Molly McDaniels because that one was provided. We don't know the other one because we don't know what the other device was at this time. It could have been a car. There's a lot of things it could have been. So it doesn't necessarily mean that's a person walking around is where I'm headed with that.
How do you identify the distinction between a car or a phone? Because that seems like it would be pretty easy to make a distinction about.
It could be, depending on what the device is and the follow-up that's done. I haven't seen the records that I would need to see to be able to answer those questions for you. I just haven't seen them. I would love to, but I haven't.
I think your report, I don't have your exact words, but you indicate that there was no follow-up done with that phone number.
I don't only indicate that there was no follow-up, I actually articulate ways that follow-up could still be done on some of that. So yeah, I'll lean into that one with you guys that, that's a hole we can plug pretty quickly.
And how did they get those 2 numbers?
It was the Google geofence.
How do we get Bryan Kohberger's name?
And when?
This is all out there. It's
We
in.
want to hear from you, Zach. We know what's out there. We want to hear from you.
I think the case, and there's
Wow.
I've got to be just brutally honest with you
Wow, sassy.
guys really quick here. Some of the accounting of this case through other people who worked on the case and other experts on this case is so incredibly faltered. It's surprising to me. I recently reviewed a podcast where someone was saying, well, there was these 4 brothers that were identified, and they just gave up on them. And it is clear to me that that expert took no time to educate themselves on the hearings that happened with this case, how DNA, genealogy actually works. All of that has come out. It's all in hearings. Yes, there's 4 brothers. Those 4 brothers are extremely distant relatives of Bryan Kohberger's. So that's what people don't understand is when we start IgG, we're looking at a family tree, and I can find branches of that tree that is so far removed from the actual individual I'm looking for, there's no way these 2 people could know each other. Well, when I'm putting IgG together and I find one of these people, it doesn't mean I'm going to immediately find my suspect. But by contacting that individual and trying to obtain their DNA to help build out more branches of the tree can give me a clearer picture. The 4 brothers have nothing to do. They're not alternative suspects. They're not in any way connected to this crime. The 4 brothers, very simply, are a very distant relative of the person who left their DNA on the knife sheath, right? So they make contact with one of those brothers. That brother says, no, I don't want anything to do with this. And that's when Offren starts and the FBI takes over. At that point, the FBI, and I'm not going to get into the background of that piece, they have a process where they can take an S&P profile and they can enhance it, if you will. They go through that process, and in doing that process, they load that into a couple of genealogy databases. And very quickly, because of the data that's in those genealogy databases, they're able to determine the most probable candidate for that DNA left on the knife sheath, specifically the button, is Bryan Kohberger. At which
she's packing her bag. She's ready to go home.
point they contact law enforcement and the prosecutors, and they explain very clearly, we believe Bryan Kohberger is your suspect. It's a tip. You can't use this in court. You can't use this as probable cause. You can only use this as a tip, but now it's your job to go build a case against Bryan Kohberger. And when you do, and you match his DNA to this crime scene DNA, it's going to match. And it does match. I've heard people say, well, they never match Bryan Kohberger's DNA to the actual DNA from the snap. That is absolute nonsense. It 100% matched. So, that argument in of itself just fails incredibly well too.
So there was a test from Brian's DNA testing it against the DNA that was drawn.
Of course there was, Ron. At his arrest. Did they not look where he had a buccal swab taken? Thank you, Miss L. Briley. Thank you for the fingers. Oh my God, these people are insufferable, dude.
Was taken from the snap, and it was a direct match.
1,000%. In fact, there was more than one. You have to understand, when they took the DNA from the snap, just the process. And I don't want to talk about Bryan Kohberger's case. I'm just going to talk about DNA evidence. When we recover DNA from a crime scene, that DNA profile is known, and it is a really good profile. This isn't a partial profile. This isn't a very, a little tiny piece of trace DNA. It is a complete profile. They got an excellent profile of a suspect that touched that knife sheath. When they very first decided, hey, Bryan Kohberger looks like a really good suspect based on the IgG, and they do a trash pull where they actually obtain trash from the family's house, there is items of trash in that house that match family members of Bryan Kohberger's DNA. That match happens. Well, at that point, they actually get a sample of Bryan's DNA, and that match happens as well. So any claims by any expert that the DNA profile from the knife sheath was never compared to Bryan Kohberger's DNA is absolute nonsense. It was. That's the strongest piece of evidence in this case. Trust me when I say the defense would have had a field day if they could show the jury that the DNA from Bryan Kohberger doesn't match the knife sheath. I mean, that's your whole case. Everything falls after that.
Okay, so I like that. Just real quick, Kristen, I'll let you go. But so you would agree?
No, when they get DNA from the trash, they don't need a warrant to collect that Q-tip, just like they did with Rex Heuermann. They got his DNA off a piece of freaking pizza crust and identified him.
I mean, there's a lot of other evidence that you're saying is overwhelming, but you would agree that if that knife sheath, for whatever reason, you're going to make my own conspiracy theory that sheath can't be tied to Bryan's DNA, that the case falls apart.
100%. And any defense attorney who isn't able to show that through it, because let's be honest, with that part, it's very transparent testing. When we go to a DNA lab, it's not like we take a couple handwritten notes and we just call it a day. There is a very established forensic process of DNA typing in and actually getting that test. So any competent defense attorney who wouldn't be able to show that if that existed should not be practicing criminal law. That's kind of criminal defense attorney 101.
Okay, and once they get sorry, Kristen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yet they didn't weren't able to show their work on how they got it.
I disagree with that. They didn't show.
Did you guys hear that? Hang on, guys.
Their work on the IgG. And I would agree with you with that that's a problem. And it's a problem because it was intentionally withheld. It was actually destroyed. So
See, there you go. Intentional and destroyed. This just adds to the amazing transparency of this amazing investigation.
Yeah, but we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about obtaining a DNA sample from a crime scene, and I don't have any evidence in front of me to question that piece of evidence. That's everything looks good to me. And if there's something there that you guys are aware of, I'm not aware of it. I haven't seen anything that makes me think that initial profile, that DNA profile developed from the knife sheath is problematic. I don't. I have a ton of issues about the IgG, and I've been very publicly, I have articulated those. So you and I are on the same page there. But the idea that after the IgG and they discover Bryan Kohberger and they physically take Bryan Kohberger's sample and they get that DNA and they look at the knife sheath, that those two don't match, that's
Oh, these chicks. No, someone outside. No, my husband went out there, but someone was outside, like, in distress, like, I was like, what is... Hold on, I'm trying to listen. People are driving away. I don't know what it was. I'll figure it out. Everything's okay, though. Everything's okay. It just startled me, man. It was right outside my window. They were like, it sounded like they said, help. And I was like, what? It's okay, though. Everything's fine. All right, so let's skip forward a little bit because these people are insufferable. Okay, so he's telling her to read the book. See, anybody can buy this book. He wants to listen.
Say. Now, to your point, Kristen, I couldn't agree with you more, and I've been very vocal. Read the book. The book is very clear. I 100% believe that a narrative was formed around Bryan Kohberger after December 19th. And that was done by cherry picking things that really helped that narrative and omitting things that in any way contradicted that narrative. And I've been incredibly outspoken about that from day one. So I agree with you there. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean Bryan Kohberger couldn't be the suspect. It just means this was a terrible investigation and that there's potential legal consequences to that. I would agree with you 100% on that.
Do you recall, and I know the information's out there, but do you happen to recall when they actually took the DNA from the sheath? I mean, how long after it was discovered?
It was pretty quick. It was, here's what I can tell you, that the Washington State University police are the ones who identified the vehicle as a potential lead. The DNA was already at Othram being worked when that happened. So, if we look at that order, it was pretty quickly done, which it should be in a case like this. Like, you're going to put every resource you have into that.
Yeah.
And to your knowledge, was the chain of custody regarding the DNA always documented and everybody knew exactly where it was at any point? Because I know there is information that tends to infer that there was a 3-day period that nobody could verify exactly where the DNA was.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the chain of custody issue on the DNA to speak to it at all. I would love to weigh in on that. I just don't know.
Can we go back to the sheath for just a second? I know this is something I wrote down, and I know the three of us have talked a lot about this. So the initial reporting of the sheath said that it was on the floor, and then it was on the bed. Can you give us your opinion on that, or why there would be a discrepancy? Because that's kind of a big piece of information to us. Why was it changed? Are we guessing? Did Nunes not first see it when he walked in and did the walkthrough? Why is there not more confirmation of exactly where that sheath was lying?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that two different ways. My first answer is going to be, man, I wish we had better documentation on that. So I'm with you guys on, should we question that? Yeah. And the reason we should question that is the lack of documentation. So number one, I want to make it really clear. I am not.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check on things outside. I'll be right back. I'm gonna let this play. Stay with me, folks.
Defending the lack of documentation. I think that's what we're really talking about here. As somebody who has worked very dynamic crime scenes like this, it is very easy to stumble across something and it gets moved or it gets somehow altered from its original position, and everybody realizes, oh crap, look at that, and a photograph is taken, and then later on it's like, okay, well, where did you see it, or what happened beforehand? And it's moved back in there just to capture, hey, it was right here when I first saw it. It's important to understand that the knife sheath, I don't know that it would have been in view. Let's just assume, and again, I'm not defending anything within the law enforcement investigation, so I don't want people saying, he's full of crap on this. I'm just saying, let's assume the knife sheath was where it was alleged to be. and it's either wrapped up or somehow combined with that sheet. The first officer, second officer, third officer may not see it. They're not looking for specific evidence like that. They're clearing the house for people. They're not searching it. So now later on, different officers come in. Maybe somebody goes to move the sheet, and as they're uncurling the sheet or they're pulling the sheet back, that knife sheath falls on the floor. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying, if we look at other crime scenes, that is very possible. Well, now the knife sheath is on the floor. We can't change that. That happened. I would expect somebody to photograph that and say, okay, this is where we first realized, holy crap. And then I can tell you as a crime scene supervisor who's been on there, if somebody explained, well, it was on the bed, I moved this, it fell off the bed, it's on the floor, I would tell them, okay, take a picture here. Now position it as close as you can to where it fell from. And now articulate that in a report so that we can rebuild what you actually physically observed. And again, we're going to go back to, no crime scene is perfect. We make errors. Everybody makes errors. And anybody who's sharpshooting that, well, that's just terrible police work. Well, you probably haven't been in that situation because it's very easy to do. So the real issue here is the lack of documentation. And it's not just the knife sheath. It's the entire case. I wish we had better documentation on the entire thing. It would be a different conversation today.
And you say that that's sort of one possibility. Of course, we all don't know, but that sort of also leaves open the idea that other possibilities could have happened, which as attorneys is why the chain of custody is so crucial. Sometimes maybe it's a harmless error. Sometimes it's the entirety of the case. And when that piece of evidence is the entirety of the case, you can understand, I'm sure, or appreciate why it's such a big deal.
Absolutely. There's a reason I took this case. I could not agree with you guys more. And I've been very outspoken about the fact that there are a lot of errors in this case that didn't have to be there.
Yeah.
With respect to BK's car, is that with respect to the search and there was no DNA and there was no blood in the victims, does that have any significance to you on this investigation? Because weren't there like 200 stab wounds? I mean, you would imagine that there would have, I think it was your words, there was an excessive amount of blood at this scene.
Yeah, it is clearly troubling, and I think that there was an assumption also by law enforcement that once they got a hold of this car, the entire case was going to come together because of that. So, I think it was shocking to everybody not to see that. Is it possible? 100% it's possible. We have to factor in a couple more details here. We're dealing with somebody who understands crime scene forensics to some extent. I don't think by any means they're an expert. I don't think that they had this locked down really well, but there was a basic understanding about evidence transfer, if you will. So is it possible that somebody could do this and not transfer blood to the car? 100% there is. Of course there is. Is it unlikely? Yeah, I would expect to see it. The second factor we have to bring in, though, is the gap in time. And this is probably the most important. We have a pretty significant gap from the time of the crime to the time the car is actually processed. And the problem with DNA is as time goes, we lose it. It starts to disappear in a number of different ways. So, I would love to say that, that in of itself just completely reframes this entire case. But I've had cases where I know bloody bodies have been transported in a trunk and we can prove it 15 different ways, but we didn't get trace evidence out of that trunk. I mean, it's possible to do if you have a suspect or a defendant who understands some basic crime scene transfer.
Is it possible for blood to have been in that car and then it dissipated and eroded prior to the search of the car?
It's possible that it could have been cleaned. It's possible that things could have come into contact with the blood and there's transfer and that they've been removed. There's an idea that when I get in that car, I'm touching the car. We have to understand with a little bit.
Okay, I'm back, guys. We have a domestic dispute going on across the street, is what I heard. So I'm actually going to end this out because it's pretty intense out there. Oh, my adrenaline is rushing. What I heard was the cops trying to get the guy in the car. And I know there's a little bit of a delay here, but I'm going to close this out because it's like all happening outside and I just feel sick. Whew. All right, guys. I will see you guys tomorrow night. We're going to be going over Summer Wells. And, yeah, the dogs are scared. It's just, there's a lot going on. Jeez. You guys could hear the dogs barking? Whew. I did hear that. Okay. I'll see you guys tomorrow night for Summer Wells discussion. Okay? You guys stay safe. I love you guys. All right. Thanks. Sorry for cutting it off like this, but I'm a little shook. It was a lot. Okay. All right. Bye, guys.